Welcome back to NightSleepWhisper. As the world outside grows quiet and the night settles in, I invite you to travel back in time with me to the foggy streets of Victorian London. Tonight, we embark on a grand journey, a 50-chapter saga known as the Silver Watch and the Blackwood Mystery. We will follow Arthur Miller through hidden manors and ancient mines to uncover a truth buried by time. Find your most comfortable position, adjust your pillow, and let your breath slow down. Close your eyes and leave the day behind. The shadows are calling, and our story is about to begin. The morning in London was cold and very grey. A thick fog covered the streets. It was hard to see the tops of the tall brick buildings. Arthur Miller walked quickly along the sidewalk. He was a quiet man in his 30s. He wore a plain brown coat and a black hat. In his hand, he carried a heavy leather bag. Inside the bag were many important papers. Arthur was a clerk for a large law office. He spent his days reading long documents and writing letters. He liked his job because it was organized. Today, however, he felt a little nervous. He was on his way to Blackwood Manor. It was one of the largest and oldest houses in the city. Lord Blackwood was a very rich and powerful man. He was also a very private man. Arthur reached the end of the street. The iron gates of the manor stood before him. They were tall and pointed. The metal was cold and wet from the fog. Arthur looked through the gates. He saw a long path with many old trees. At the end of the path was the house. It was made of dark stone. There were many windows, but they all looked dark. He reached for the heavy metal handle on the gate. The gate was heavy, and it opened. Arthur walked inside. He felt very small under the tall trees. The air was silent. There were no birds singing today. The only sound was the rhythm of his own boots on the gravel path. When he reached the front door, he stopped. The door was made of dark wood with a large silver knocker. Arthur lifted the knocker and hit the door 3 times. The sound was loud in the quiet morning. He waited for a few moments. Finally, he heard the sound of heavy footsteps inside. The door opened slowly. A tall man with grey hair stood there. He wore a very clean black suit. This was Mr. Henderson, the butler. He looked at Arthur with a serious expression. "Good morning," Arthur said. He tried to speak clearly. "My name is Arthur Miller. I am the clerk from the law office. I have the documents for Lord Blackwood." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "Yes, Mr. Miller. We were expecting you. Please, come inside. It is a very chilly morning." Arthur stepped into the grand hall. The ceiling was very high. There were large paintings of men and women on the walls. They all looked very stern. The floor was made of white marble. It was very clean and shiny. Arthur followed Mr. Henderson down a long hallway. The house felt very empty. It was also very cold. Arthur wondered why there were no fires in the fireplaces. "Lord Blackwood is in his study," Mr. Henderson said. He did not look back. "He is a very busy man. Please wait here for a moment." Mr. Henderson stopped in front of a large door at the end of the hall. He knocked gently. There was no answer. He knocked again, a bit louder. Still, the house remained silent. Mr. Henderson looked at Arthur. His face was very pale. "He usually answers the door quickly," the butler said. He tried the handle of the large door. It was not locked. The door moved slowly on its hinges. It did not make a sound. The study was a large and beautiful room. The walls were covered with hundreds of books from the floor to the high ceiling. A large green rug lay on the dark wood floor. In the center of the room, there was a massive desk made of oak. The heavy velvet curtains were closed. Only a small amount of grey light came through the gaps. The air smelled like old paper and cold tobacco. "Lord Blackwood," Mr. Henderson whispered. He walked toward the desk. Arthur followed him. He felt a cold shiver on his back. The room felt different from the rest of the house. It felt very heavy and very still. Lord Blackwood sat in a large leather chair behind the desk. His head was resting on his chest. His arms were hanging at his sides. He looked like he was sleeping after a long day of work. "My lord," Henderson said again. He reached out a hand. He touched the man's shoulder gently. Lord Blackwood did not move. He did not wake up. His body was very stiff and cold under his silk coat. Henderson pulled his hand back quickly. He looked at Arthur. His eyes were wide with fear. "He is dead," the butler said. His voice was very low and shaky. Arthur walked closer to the desk. He felt his heart beating fast. He was a clerk, not a doctor. He had never seen a dead person before. Lord Blackwood looked very old in the dim light. His skin was the color of grey paper. Arthur looked closely at the man. There was no blood on his clothes. There was no sign of a fight in the room. Every chair was in its place. Every book was on its shelf. On the desk, there was a glass of water and a small plate with a biscuit. A fountain pen lay near the man's right hand. Arthur looked at the papers on the desk. They were the documents Lord Blackwood was reading before he died. Arthur felt a strange feeling. Something was wrong. The room was too perfect. "We must call the police," Arthur said. His voice sounded loud in the quiet room. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. He could not take his eyes off his master. Arthur looked at the top of the oak desk again. He saw a small, clean circle in the dust on the wood. It was near the dead man's left hand. It looked like a small object usually sat there. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur said. "Where is his watch?" The butler looked down at the desk. He blinked several times. He always kept his silver pocket watch right there on the desk. The butler said, "He never went anywhere without it. It is gone." Arthur stood in the hallway. Mr. Henderson was gone to find the police. The house was very quiet now. Arthur did not want to go back into the study. He looked at the paintings on the wall. The people in the pictures had dark eyes. It felt like they were watching him. He held his leather bag tightly against his chest. His hands were a little cold. After 30 minutes, a black carriage stopped in front of the manor. The horse's hooves on the gravel was very loud in the morning air. Two men in dark blue coats walked up the path. One man was tall and had a thick red beard. This was Inspector Reed. He looked like a man who did not like to waste time. His boots made a firm noise on the marble floor. "Where is the body?" Reed asked. He did not say hello. His voice was deep and rough. He looked at Arthur and then at the butler. Mr. Henderson led them to the study. The inspector walked inside. He did not look nervous or sad. He took off his leather gloves and put them on the oak desk. He looked at Lord Blackwood for a long time. He touched the dead man's neck and looked at his eyes. He checked the glass of water and the biscuit on the plate. He smelled the air in the room. He was an old man. Reed said finally. He looked at his partner, a younger officer. His heart simply stopped. It happens to many men his age. It is a natural death. Arthur stepped forward. He felt small next to the tall inspector. "But Inspector," he said, "the room is very tidy, and something is missing." Reed turned his head slowly. He looked at Arthur with cold, grey eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Arthur Miller. I am a clerk from the law office. I came here to bring some legal papers for his signature." "A clerk," Reed repeated. He did not sound impressed. "And what do you think is missing, Mr. Miller?" Arthur pointed to the empty spot on the desk. Lord Blackwood always kept a silver pocket watch right there. Mr. Henderson said so. The watch is gone. There is even a small circle in the dust where it used to stay. Inspector Reed looked at the desk. He saw the small circle in the dust. He shrugged his shoulders and put his gloves back on. Maybe he put it in his pocket. Maybe he gave it to a friend yesterday. A missing watch does not mean a crime happened. Mr. Miller. But the watch was very important to him, Arthur said. He felt that the inspector was not listening. Reed walked toward the door. Listen, Mr. Miller. This is a sad day for London. But it is not a mystery. Lord Blackwood was 70 years old. He died in his chair while reading his papers. That is the end of the story. Arthur looked at the dead man one last time. He did not think it was the end. He felt that the story was only beginning. Inspector Reed walked out of the study to talk to his assistant in the hallway. Arthur remained in the room with the body of Lord Blackwood. He felt a strange heavy feeling in his chest. He did not believe the inspector. A man like Lord Blackwood did not just leave his precious watch behind. Arthur moved closer to the leather chair. He looked at the dead man's silk vest. The fabric was dark blue and very expensive. Then, Arthur saw something. Near the small pocket of the vest, there was a tiny hole. The fabric was torn. It looked like someone pulled something away very quickly. Arthur bent down. He looked at the carpet under the desk. The green rug was thick and soft. Near the foot of the chair, something bright caught the light. It was very small. Arthur picked it up carefully. It was a single link from a silver chain. It was broken. This was not a natural death. Arthur whispered to himself. Someone took that watch by force. He looked at the broken link in his hand. It was made of high-quality silver. It was shaped like a tiny leaf. This was a very special watch chain. He put the silver link into his own pocket. He did not want to show it to Inspector Reed yet. The inspector did not listen to him before. Arthur wanted to find more proof first. Mr. Henderson came back into the room. His eyes were red. He looked very tired and sad. He started to tidy up some papers on a side table. Mr. Henderson, Arthur said quietly, can you tell me more about that silver watch? Was it very old? The butler stopped moving. He looked at the empty spot on the oak desk. Oh, yes. Mr. Miller. It was a gift from the king many years ago. It had a very special design. There was a crest on the back. It showed a lion holding a key. Lord Blackwood loved that watch. He checked the time every hour. He said the watch was his most loyal friend. Did he ever leave it anywhere else? Arthur asked. Never. Henderson replied. He shook his head. He even slept with it on his bedside table. He told me that if the watch ever stopped, his heart would stop too. It is very strange that it is not here now. Arthur looked at the torn vest again. He thought about the person who took the watch. Why was it so important? Was it just because it was silver? Or was there another reason? Outside, the wind started to blow. It pushed against the large windows of the study. The heavy curtains moved slightly. Arthur felt a cold draft in the room. He realized that someone could enter the house through the gardens. He decided to look for the housekeeper next. Maybe she saw something the butler did not see. Arthur picked up his leather bag and prepared to leave the study. He had a secret now. The broken silver link in his pocket. He was no longer just a clerk. He was a witness to a mystery. Arthur left the silent study and walked back into the long hallway. He found Mr. Henderson near the front door. The butler looked older than he did an hour ago. His shoulders were slumped. Mr. Henderson, Arthur said quietly, is the housekeeper available? I would like to speak with her. Clara. She is in the small sitting room near the kitchen. Henderson replied. He pointed toward the back of the house. She is very upset. She worked for Lord Blackwood for 20 years. Arthur walked through the house. The air felt heavier now. He found the sitting room. It was a small, warm room with a low ceiling. A woman sat in a wooden chair by a small fire. She wore a black dress and a white apron. Her hair was pulled back tightly, but several grey strands were loose. She was pressing a handkerchief against her mouth. "Excuse me," Arthur said. "Are you Clara?" The woman jumped. She looked at Arthur with wide, frightened eyes. She gripped the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Are you with the police?" "No," Arthur said. He stepped into the room slowly. "My name is Arthur Miller. I am a clerk from the law office. I am here because I found Lord Blackwood this morning." Clara looked down at her lap. Her hands were shaking. "It is a terrible day," she said. "A very dark day for this house." Arthur sat in a chair across from her. He noticed that she kept looking toward the door. She seemed to be listening for footsteps. "Clara, I noticed that Lord Blackwood's silver watch is missing. Did you see it this morning?" Clara gasped. She pulled her handkerchief tight. "The watch? I do not know. I did not enter the study this morning. I only brought the tea tray to the door and left it for Mr. Henderson." "But you look very worried," Arthur said gently. "Did you see anyone else in the house today? Perhaps a visitor in the early morning?" Clara hesitated. She looked at the fire and then back at Arthur. "I saw a shadow," she whispered. Her voice was so low that Arthur had to lean forward. "Early this morning, before the sun was up, I was in the kitchen. I looked out the window at the garden. I saw a man in a long black coat. He was walking away from the house." "Did you see his face?" Arthur asked. "No," Clara said. She shook her head quickly. It was too dark and the fog was too thick. But he moved very fast. He did not look like a servant. He looked like a gentleman. Suddenly, a door closed in the distance. Clara stood up quickly. She looked terrified. "I must go," she said. "There is much work to do for the funeral. Please, do not tell the inspector I spoke to you. He does not like servants who talk too much." She hurried out of the room before Arthur could say another word. He watched her go. She was hiding something. He was sure of it. Why was she so afraid of the inspector? And who was the man in the garden? Arthur stood alone in the small sitting room for a moment. He thought about Clara's words. A man in a long black coat in the garden. It was a very important clue. Arthur decided to return to the study one more time. He wanted to look at the room again before the police took everything away. He walked quietly down the hallway. The house was still cold. He reached the study door and pushed it open. The room was empty now. The body of Lord Blackwood was covered with a white sheet. The heavy curtains still blocked the sun. Arthur walked toward the large oak desk. He looked at the floor near the leather chair. He remembered the broken silver link he found earlier. He knelt down on the green rug. He started to look at the carpet very closely. He moved his hands over the soft fabric. Near the corner of the desk, he felt something hard under the rug. It was not a piece of wood. It felt like paper. Arthur lifted the heavy edge of the rug. He saw a small, white envelope. It was tucked deep under the fabric. There was no name on the front of the envelope. It was sealed with red wax. Arthur picked it up and stood up quickly. His heart was beating fast. He looked at the door to make sure no one was watching. He broke the red wax seal with his thumb. Inside the envelope, there was a single piece of thick paper. The writing was hurried and messy. It did not look like the neat writing of a clerk. The letter was short. It said, "The debt is too large now. You cannot hide the truth forever. If you do not bring the watch to the old bridge tonight, everyone will know about the mine. Do not be late. Mr. X." Arthur read the words 3 times. A debt. A secret mine. And the watch was mentioned specifically. The letter was a threat. Lord Blackwood was being blackmailed. Arthur looked at the dead man under the white sheet. Was this why he died? Because he did not bring the watch to the bridge? Arthur heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. He quickly shoved the letter into his inside coat pocket. He smoothed down his clothes and tried to look calm. Inspector Reed walked into the room. He looked at Arthur with a suspicious expression. "Still here, Mr. Miller?" The inspector asked. "I thought you had work to do at your law office." "I was just leaving, Inspector," Arthur said. He picked up his leather bag. "I just wanted to make sure I did not leave any of my own papers on the desk." "Well, hurry along," Reed said. He started to look through the drawers of the desk. "This house is now a place of investigation. I do not want any clerks getting in the way." Arthur nodded and walked out of the room. He felt the weight of the letter against his chest. He had the proof now. This was not a natural death. It was a murder, and the secret was hidden in a silver watch. Arthur walked away from Blackwood Manor as fast as he could. The iron gates closed behind him. He did not look back. The fog was still thick, and the air felt damp against his face. He walked for several blocks until he found a small, quiet tea shop. He went inside and sat at a small wooden table in the corner. The shop was warm and smelled like dried herbs. An old woman brought him a pot of tea. Arthur poured a cup, but he did not drink it yet. His hands were still a little shaky. He reached into his coat and pulled out the secret letter. "The debt is too large now." Arthur read the words again. He thought about Lord Blackwood. Everyone in London knew the man was very wealthy. He owned many buildings and a large house. How could he have a debt? And what was the mine the letter mentioned? Arthur worked at a law office that handled many of Lord Blackwood's business papers. He tried to remember the names on the old files. He closed his eyes and thought about the tall stacks of paper on his desk. Suddenly, a name came to his mind. The Silver Star Mining Company. A few months ago, Arthur saw a document about that company. It was an old paper from many years ago. It had Lord Blackwood's signature on it. At the time, Arthur did not think it was important. Now, it felt like the center of a dark secret. Mr. X. Arthur whispered to himself. The name was not a real name. It was a mask. Someone was hiding their identity. This person knew about the debt. They knew about the mine. And they wanted the silver watch. Arthur looked at the broken silver link in his hand. He put it next to the letter on the table. The watch was not just a way to tell time. It was a key. The letter said, "If you do not bring the watch, everyone will know." This meant the watch was proof of something. Maybe there was something hidden inside the watch. Or maybe the watch belonged to someone else a long time ago. Arthur finished his tea quickly. He felt a new energy. He was a quiet clerk, but he was also a very smart man. He knew how to find information. He decided to go back to his office. He needed to find the file for the Silver Star Mining Company. He needed to know why a rich lord was afraid of a man named Mr. X. As he stood up to leave, he noticed a man sitting by the window of the tea shop. The man wore a long black coat. He was holding a newspaper, but he was not reading it. He was looking at Arthur. Arthur felt a cold chill. Was this the man Clara saw in the garden? Arthur put the letter and the silver link back into his pocket and walked out into the street. The sun began to set, but the fog made the evening look like night. Arthur did not go straight to his office. He felt that the man in the black coat was still behind him. He turned a corner and walked into a small, narrow street. He saw a sign hanging over a wooden door. It was a picture of an old, iron key. This was the Rusty Key, a pub where many workers and clerks went after a long day. Arthur pushed the heavy door open. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of roasted meat and strong ale. The room was full of men in brown and grey coats. They sat at long wooden tables. The sound of many voices talking at once filled the room. Arthur walked to the bar. A large man with a red face was cleaning a glass with a white cloth. This was Barney, the owner of the pub. "What can I get for you, sir?" Barney asked. He had a very loud, friendly voice. "Just a glass of water, please," Arthur said. He leaned closer to the bar. "Barney, you know many people in this part of town. Did Lord Blackwood ever come here?" Barney stopped cleaning the glass. He looked at Arthur with surprise. "Lord Blackwood? A rich man like him in a place like this?" "No, sir. He was too grand for us." Arthur nodded. But then Barney leaned forward. "However," the barman whispered, "his carriage driver, Elias, comes here every Friday. He sits in that corner over there." He pointed to a dark table in the back. "Does he sit alone?" Arthur asked. "Most of the time, yes," Barney said. "But lately, he started meeting a strange man. A gentleman with very expensive boots. They spoke in low voices. They looked like they were sharing a big secret." Arthur felt a spark of excitement. "Did you hear what they talked about?" Barney shook his head. "No. But I saw something. One night, the gentleman gave Elias a small leather bag. It looked very heavy. Elias looked very happy, but he also looked very scared." Arthur thanked Barney and paid for his drink. He sat at a table in the shadows. He wanted to wait for Elias, but the carriage driver was not there yet. Arthur looked at the door. Every time it opened, cold air entered the room. Suddenly, the door opened again. A man stepped inside. He did not go to the bar. He stood by the door and looked around the room. He wore a long black coat and a hat that covered his eyes. Arthur felt his heart jump. It was the same man from the tea shop. The man's eyes moved across the room and stopped on Arthur. He did not move. He just watched. Arthur realized he could not stay here. This man was not just a stranger. He was a hunter. Arthur stood up and walked toward the back door of the pub. He needed to find another way out. Arthur stepped out of the back door of the pub. The air in the alley was very cold and smelled of wet coal and old rain. He did not look back. He started to walk quickly, his boots clicking softly on the damp stones. The fog was even thicker here. It felt like a heavy, grey blanket over the city. It was hard to see more than a few feet in front of him. He reached the end of the alley and turned into a narrow street. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him. It was the steady rhythm of footsteps. The sound of heavy leather boots hitting the cobblestones was clear in the quiet night. Arthur stopped. The footsteps stopped a moment later. Arthur's heart began to beat very fast. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He was a man of books and ink, not a man of action. He started to walk again, faster this time. The footsteps behind him started again. 2. They matched his speed perfectly. "Is someone there?" Arthur called out. His voice sounded thin and small in the fog. There was no answer. Only the sound of the wind moving between the tall brick buildings reached his ears. He turned a corner and began to run. His leather bag hit his leg with every step. He did not know these streets very well at night. Everything looked different in the dark. He passed a closed bakery and a small, silent church. The orange light from the gas lamps made strange, long shadows on the walls. He looked over his shoulder. For a second, the fog opened. He saw a tall figure. It was the man in the long black coat. The man was not running, but he was walking with very long steps. His face was still hidden under his dark hat. He was like a ghost following Arthur through the London streets. Arthur reached a small stone bridge over a canal. The water below was black and very still. He stopped to catch his breath. The cold air hurt his lungs. He leaned against the stone wall of the bridge and listened. Silence. The footsteps had stopped. Arthur looked into the grey mist, but he saw nothing. The man was gone, or perhaps he was just waiting in the shadows. Arthur felt a deep sense of fear. Why was this man following him? Did he want the letter? Did he want the silver link? He realized he could not go to his office now. It was too late, and the man might be waiting there. He needed to go to his apartment. He needed to lock his door and think. He moved away from the bridge, keeping close to the walls of the buildings. He watched every shadow and listened to every tiny noise. He felt like a mouse being hunted by a cat. Arthur finally reached his street. The street was narrow, and the houses were very close together. Only one gas lamp was lit. The light was orange and weak. Arthur walked to the front door of his apartment building. He was very tired. His legs felt like lead. He reached into his pocket for his heavy metal key. But then, he stopped. The front door was not closed. There was a small gap between the door and the frame. A cold wind came out from the dark hallway. Arthur felt a shiver of fear. He always locked this door. Every person in the building had a key. Why was it open now? He pushed the door slowly. Arthur stepped inside. The hallway was pitch black. He listened carefully. He did not hear any voices. He only heard the sound of the rain starting to fall outside. The air smelled like damp stone and old dust. He walked up the narrow stairs. Each step made a soft, hollow noise. He reached the second floor. He stood in front of his own door. His breath became fast. The door was not just open. The wood near the lock was splintered and broken. Someone had used a heavy tool to force the door. Arthur did not go inside immediately. He stood in the hallway and watched the shadows. He was afraid the man in the black coat was waiting for him inside the dark room. He held his leather bag like a shield. After a minute of silence, he stepped into his home. He struck a match. The small flame burned his fingers for a second, but then he lit the candle on the small table near the door. The yellow light showed a terrible scene. His apartment was a mess. His books, which he loved very much, were scattered across the floor. Many pages were torn. His small wooden desk was upside down. His drawers were pulled out and emptied. Even his bed was ruined. The blankets were on the floor, and the mattress was moved. White feathers from his pillow were everywhere, looking like cold snow in the candlelight. Arthur looked at the chaos. He felt a deep sadness and then a great anger. This was his private place. Now, it was broken. He reached into his coat pocket. He felt the letter and the small silver link. They were still there. The person who broke into his house did not find what they wanted. He walked to the window. He was very careful not to make a noise. He pulled the curtain back just a little bit. Down in the street, the fog was moving in waves. He saw a figure standing under the single gas lamp. The figure was tall and wore a long black coat. The man was looking up at Arthur's window. The air in the room felt very cold. The window was slightly open, and the white lace curtains moved in the wind. On the floor, a bottle of ink was broken. A large black stain was growing on his white rug. Arthur realized he could not stay here tonight. He had to leave, and he had to leave now. Arthur stood in the middle of his ruined room. The candlelight danced on the walls. He felt a deep sense of fear, but he also felt confused. He walked slowly to a small wooden box on his shelf. This was where he kept his life savings. He opened the lid with trembling fingers. The gold coins were still there. "They did not want my money," Arthur whispered. He moved to the corner of the room. He had a small silver teapot that belonged to his mother. It was valuable, but it was still sitting on the small table. He checked his extra suit in the wardrobe. The thief had searched the pockets, but the clothes were still there. The person who came into his home was not a common thief. They were not looking for things to sell at a pawn shop. They were looking for something very specific. They were looking for the secret letter from Mr. X, or perhaps the silver watch itself. Arthur felt a cold sweat on his forehead. He realized that the man in the black coat knew exactly who he was. He looked at the broken ink bottle on the floor. The black liquid looked like a dark mirror. Arthur saw his own reflection in the glass of a picture frame on the floor. He looked tired and pale. He was just a clerk. He was not a hero. But he was now the only person who knew that Lord Blackwood's death was a crime. "I cannot stay here," he said to the empty room. "It is not safe." He picked up a small leather bag. He put a clean shirt, a warm scarf, and a crust of bread inside. He also took a heavy iron candle holder. It was the only weapon he had. He kept the secret letter and the silver link in his inside coat pocket. He patted his chest to make sure they were still there. The paper made a soft, crinkling sound. Arthur looked at the window again. The man in the black coat was no longer under the gas lamp. The street was empty and dark. The fog was moving like a slow river. This made Arthur even more nervous. If he could not see the man could be anywhere. He could be waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Arthur blew out the candle. The room became pitch black. He waited for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. He heard the sound of the rain hitting the roof. It was a steady, rhythmic sound. He walked to the door and listened. He did not hear any breathing or footsteps in the hallway. He stepped out into the hall and closed his broken door as quietly as he could. He did not use the main stairs. Instead, he went to the end of the hallway to a small, narrow door. This door led to the service stairs used by the coal delivery men. The stairs were made of cold stone and were very steep. Arthur began to climb down into the dark. Arthur moved down the stone stairs in total darkness. He kept one hand on the cold, damp wall to find his way. His boots made a tiny tapping sound on the steps. Finally, he reached the bottom. He pushed open a small wooden door and stepped into the narrow alley behind his building. The rain was falling harder now. The cold water soaked into his coat immediately. He walked quickly away from his street. He did not go toward the main road. Instead, he turned into a maze of small paths near the river. He found a small wooden bench under a stone arch. The arch protected him from the rain. Arthur sat down and tried to stop his hands from shaking. He was cold, wet, and very tired. He reached into his coat to make sure the letter and the silver link were safe. As he moved his hand deep into the inner pocket, his fingers touched something hard and cold. It was not the letter. It was not the silver link. It was something else. Arthur felt a small hole in the lining of his coat. This hole was not there yesterday. He put 2 fingers into the hole and pulled. He felt a small, heavy object. He pulled it out and held it up to the dim light of a distant street lamp. It was a small, golden key. Arthur gasped. Where did this come from? He whispered. He looked at the key closely. It was very beautiful. It had a small flower design on the handle. It was much smaller than a door key. It looked like a key for a jewelry box or a private drawer. Arthur thought back to his visit to Blackwood Manor. He remembered the moment he arrived in the study. Lord Blackwood was already dead in his chair. Wait. Arthur remembered something. When he first entered the room, he walked close to the body. He had leaned over the desk to look at the papers. For a brief second, his coat had brushed against Lord Blackwood's hand. Could the Lord have been alive for a few more seconds? Could he have slipped this key into Arthur's pocket before he breathed his last breath? Or perhaps the key was already on the desk and Arthur's pocket caught it by accident. No. That was impossible. The hole in the lining was new. Someone had put the key there on purpose. Arthur stared at the golden key. First a missing watch, then a threatening letter, then a broken silver link, and now a hidden key. All these pieces belonged to a puzzle he did not understand. Lord Blackwood wanted me to have this. Arthur realized. He knew someone was coming for him. He could not speak, so he gave me the key to his secrets. Arthur felt a new sense of duty. He was no longer just a clerk who found a body. He was a messenger for a dead man. He stood up and tucked the golden key into a safe place near his belt. He needed to find a hotel where no one knew his name. He needed a place to sleep before he started his search tomorrow. Arthur found a small, cheap inn near the river. It was called the Blue Bell. The building was old, and the paint was peeling off the walls. The air inside smelled like fried fish and damp wood. He paid a small coin to the innkeeper, a heavy woman with a tired face. She gave him a key to a tiny room on the 3rd floor. The room had only a small bed, a wooden chair, and a wash basin. Arthur locked the door and pushed the chair against it. He did not take off his clothes. He lay on the bed and held his bag close to his chest. He watched the shadows of the rain on the ceiling until he finally fell asleep. The next morning, the sun tried to shine through the grey clouds. Arthur woke up early. He felt stiff and cold. He washed his face with cold water. He looked at the golden key, the silver link, and the letter. They were the only things that mattered now. He went downstairs to the main room of the inn to find some breakfast. As he sat at a small table, a man in a worker's cap approached him. The man looked around the room nervously. "Are you Mr. Miller?" the man asked in a low voice. Arthur felt his heart jump. "Who is asking?" "A woman gave me a penny to give you this," the man said. He put a small, folded piece of paper on the table and walked away quickly. Arthur opened the paper. The handwriting was shaky. It was from Clara, the housekeeper. It said, "Please, Mr. Miller, I have more to tell you. I cannot speak in the house. Meet me at the big oak tree in St. James's Park at noon. Come alone. I am in great danger." Arthur finished his bread and tea quickly. He was worried about Clara. She was an adult woman who had served the Blackwood family for years. If she was afraid, the danger was real. He checked the time on a large clock on the wall. It was 11 o'clock. He had 1 hour. He left the inn and walked toward the park. He avoided the main streets. He watched the people behind him. He looked for the long black coat, but he did not see it. The city was busy. Businessmen in tall hats walked past him. Flower sellers called out to the crowds. The world looked normal, but Arthur knew it was not. He reached St. James's Park. The grass was wet and green. Many people were walking along the paths. Arthur found the big oak tree. It was very old and had thick, twisted branches. He stood under the tree and waited. A few minutes later, he saw a woman in a black cloak. She had a hood over her head. She walked slowly, looking at the ground. When she reached the tree, she looked up. It was Clara. Her face was very pale, and her eyes were red from crying. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. She grabbed Arthur's sleeve. "The house is not safe anymore. Someone is searching every room." They are looking for something Lord Blackwood hidden many years ago." Clara pulled her black cloak tight against the cold wind. She looked at the people walking in the park. She looked at a man walking a dog and a lady sitting on a bench. She was very afraid that someone was listening to their conversation. She leaned closer to Arthur. "Mr. Miller, I must tell you the truth," she said. Her voice was thin and shaky. "The Blackwood family has a secret. Everyone in London thinks Lord Blackwood was the only son. They think he inherited everything because he was the only heir. But that is a lie." Arthur felt a spark of surprise. "A lie? What do you mean, Clara?" "There was another son," Clara whispered. "His name was Thomas. He was the older brother. By law, the house, the money, and the title belonged to him. But Thomas was a very different man. He was loud and he liked to spend money on games and horses. He was not a quiet man of books like the lord you knew." Arthur listened carefully. He did not move. "What happened to him?" "Many years ago, there was a terrible fight," Clara explained. "The father, the old lord, was a very stern man. He was tired of Thomas's behavior. One night, the house was full of shouting. The old lord told Thomas to leave and never come back. He took Thomas out of his will. He gave everything to the younger brother. So, Lord Blackwood became the master because his brother was sent away." Arthur said, "Yes." Clara nodded. "But Thomas did not leave London. He stayed. He changed his name. He was very angry for many years. He felt that his younger brother stole his life. He felt the manor and the gold belonged to him." Arthur thought about the man in the black coat, the tall figure who followed him through the fog and stood outside his window. Could it be Thomas? "Is he the one following me?" Clara shook her head quickly. "I do not know what he looks like now. It has been 20 years. But Lord Blackwood was afraid. Before he died, he was very nervous. He told me that if anything happened to him, the silver watch was the most important thing. He said the watch was the only thing that could prove who was the true owner of the Blackwood name." Arthur felt the broken silver link in his pocket. He also thought about the golden key. He did not tell Clara about the key yet. He wanted to be careful. In this story, he did not know who to trust. "Where is Thomas now?" Arthur asked. "The last I heard, he lived near the London docks." Clara said. "He worked for a shipping company under a different name. But that was a long time ago. He could be anywhere." Suddenly, Clara looked past Arthur's shoulder. Her face turned white. She stopped breathing for a second. Her eyes were fixed on a point near the park lake. "He is here," she whispered. Arthur turned around quickly. Far away, near a stone bridge, a man was standing. He was tall and wore a long black coat. He was watching them. The man started to walk toward the big oak tree. His steps were slow and steady. "Run, Mr. Miller," Clara cried. "Do not let him catch you. He wants what you have." Clara turned and ran into a crowd of people near the park gates. Arthur wanted to help her, but he knew the man was looking for the clerk, not the housekeeper. He gripped his leather bag and ran into the thickest part of the park. Arthur ran through the thick trees of the park. He did not look back. He found a small stone building used by the gardeners. He went inside and hid in a dark corner. He stayed very still. He heard the man in the black coat walk past the building. The man did not stop. The sound of his boots was steady on the path. After a few minutes, the sound disappeared into the distance. Arthur waited for a long time. His heart slowly returned to a normal rhythm. He realized that Clara was right. The secret was in the history of the house. He needed to go back to Blackwood Manor, but he had to be very careful. He walked through the city as the sky became orange and then dark blue. The evening air was very cold and smelled of smoke from the city's many chimneys. He reached the back wall of the manor. There was a small wooden gate hidden by many tall bushes. Arthur pushed it open and stepped into the garden. The garden was full of old rose bushes and tall, dark trees. It looked very different at night. The shadows were long and black, like giant fingers on the grass. He saw a small light near the center of the garden. It was a lantern on the ground. Clara was there. She was sitting on a stone bench near a large statue of a lion. She looked up when she heard Arthur's footsteps on the grass. "You escaped," she said. She looked very relieved. She stood up and smoothed her apron. "I was so worried. That man. He is very dangerous. I think he is the one I saw in the garden before." "I am fine, Clara," Arthur said. He walked toward her. "You said Lord Blackwood had a secret. If the silver watch is a key, is there something here in the garden that it opens?" Clara shook her head. "Not the watch. But he used to spend a lot of time near this statue. He told me once that the most important things are always under our feet. He looked at this lion when he said it." She pointed to the ground at the base of the stone lion. The earth looked a bit loose there. Arthur did not have a shovel, but he found a sturdy piece of wood near the bench. He knelt down and began to dig into the wet dirt. The soil was cold and dark. Clara held the lantern close so Arthur could see what he was doing. After digging for a few minutes, Arthur felt something hard. He moved the dirt away with his bare hands. It was a small box made of heavy iron. It was covered in rust and wet mud. He pulled it out of the ground with both hands. It was quite heavy for its size. "You found it," Clara whispered. She leaned forward to look at the object. Arthur wiped the dirt from the top of the metal box. There was a small, round hole in the front. It was a keyhole. He reached into his belt and pulled out the small golden key he had found in his coat lining. "I think I have the key to open this," Arthur said. He felt a mix of fear and excitement. He was about to learn the secret of the Blackwood family. Arthur held the golden key in his fingers. His hand was steady now. He put the key into the small hole in the metal box. It fit perfectly. He turned the key slowly. He did not hear a loud noise, but he felt the lock move inside. He lifted the heavy lid of the box. Clara moved the lantern closer. The yellow light went inside the box. Arthur did not see gold or silver. He saw a stack of old papers and several photographs. The photographs were black and white, and the edges were yellow with age. Arthur took them out carefully. The first photograph showed a group of men standing in front of a dark cave. They wore dirty clothes and heavy boots. They held tools for digging in the earth. Above the cave, there was a large wooden sign. It said, "Silver Star Mining Company. This is the mine from the letter." Arthur whispered. He looked at the next photograph. It was a picture of two young men. They stood side by side. They looked very similar. They both had the same high forehead and serious eyes. One was clearly a young Lord Blackwood. The other man had a wilder look, with messy hair and a confident smile. "Is this Thomas?" Arthur asked, pointing to the second man. Clara looked at the photo and nodded. Her eyes were full of memories. Yes. That was many years ago. They were friends once. They started that company together in a faraway land. They wanted to find their own fortune before their father died. Arthur looked at the papers in the box. One paper was a contract. It was an official document with a red seal. It said that the Silver Star Mining Company belonged to both brothers. They were equal partners. Everything they found in the mine belonged to both of them. But something went wrong, Arthur said. He read the dates on the papers. The company became very rich very quickly. But then, all the papers changed. Thomas's name disappeared from the documents. Only Lord Blackwood's name remained. Arthur found another letter at the bottom of the box. This letter was not from Mr. X. It was a letter from Thomas to his brother. It was written many years ago. "You stole my share of the mine." The letter said, "You told our father I was a gambler and a loser, so he would send me away. You took the gold for yourself. I will have my revenge." Arthur realized the truth. Lord Blackwood was not just a rich man. He was a man with a dark past. He had betrayed his own brother to keep the wealth of the Silver Star mine. The debt in the secret letter was not about money. It was a debt of justice. Suddenly, the light from the lantern flickered. The wind grew stronger, blowing through the trees. A loud noise came from the direction of the manor house. A window on the second floor hit the wall of the house. "Someone is inside the house," Clara whispered. She looked terrified. "We must hide the box." Arthur quickly put the photos and papers back. He closed the lid and stood up. He looked toward the dark windows of the manor. A single light was moving behind the glass of the library. Someone was searching the house, and they were getting closer. Arthur and Clara stood in the shadows of the garden. They did not move for a long time. The light in the library window stayed for a moment and then disappeared. The manor was silent again, but it did not feel safe. Arthur held the heavy iron box under his arm. It was cold against his side. "Go back to your room, Clara," Arthur whispered. "You must pretend you were asleep. If they find you out here with me, you will be in danger." Clara nodded quickly. She took her lantern and walked toward the servants' entrance. She looked like a ghost in her black cloak. Arthur waited until she was inside. Then, he moved through the garden toward the back gate. He was careful to walk on the grass so his boots did not make a noise on the gravel. Just as he reached the iron gate, a bright light hit his face. Arthur stopped. He raised his hand to block the light. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," a deep voice said. Arthur's heart sank. He knew that voice. It was Inspector Reed. The tall man stepped out from behind a large tree. He was holding a powerful gas lantern. He looked at Arthur, and then his eyes moved down to the iron box. "What are you doing in a dead man's garden at night?" Reed asked. He walked closer. His face was hard, and his grey eyes were very cold. "And what is that in your hand?" Arthur tried to stay calm. He was a clerk, but he knew how to talk to authority. "I found this, Inspector. It belonged to Lord Blackwood. I think it contains important information about his death." Reed took the box from Arthur. He did not ask for permission. He looked at the rust and the mud on the metal. "You are very busy for a simple clerk, Miller. First the pocket watch, now this. You are asking too many questions." "I'm just trying to find the truth," Arthur replied. "Lord Blackwood was a client of my office. I want to know why he died." Reed leaned forward. The smell of tobacco and cold air was strong. "Listen to me very carefully. This is a police matter. You are not a detective. You are a man who writes letters for a living. This city is a dangerous place for people who go where they are not invited. Are you telling me to stop, Inspector?" Arthur asked. "I am telling you to go home," Reed said. His voice was a low growl. "I will take this box. If I see you at Blackwood Manor again, I will put you in a cell. Do you understand?" Reed did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked toward the house with the iron box. Arthur stood by the gate. He felt a mix of anger and fear. He had found the box, but now the police had it. Did Reed want to find the truth, or was he trying to hide it? Arthur remembered the golden key in his pocket. He also remembered the photos. He had seen them. He knew about the Silver Star Mining Company. He knew about the brother, Thomas. Reed had the box, but Arthur had the knowledge. He walked out of the garden and back into the foggy street. He did not go to the inn. He felt like someone was watching him from every corner. He needed to find more proof. He needed to find the silver watch. If the watch was the key to a safe, as the letter said, it was more important than the iron box. Arthur walked through the streets of London for a long time. The night was very dark, and the fog felt like a wet cloth against his skin. He did not go to the rich parts of the city. He knew that if someone stole a silver watch, they would not try to sell it to a grand jeweler. They would go to the narrow, crowded streets of the East End. He reached an area where the buildings were leaning over the road. The air smelled of old fish and coal smoke. There were many small shops here that bought and sold used items. Most of the shops were closed, but their windows were full of strange things. Arthur saw old boots, rusty tools, and broken clocks. He walked slowly, looking at every shelf behind the glass. His eyes were tired, but he did not stop. He passed a shop called the Old Lantern. Then he passed another called Jacob's Goods. Finally, he reached a corner shop with 3 golden balls hanging over the door. This was a pawn shop called the Golden Ball. The window of the shop was very dirty. Arthur had to lean close to see inside. There was a large wooden tray in the center of the window. On the tray, there were several pocket watches. Most of them were made of cheap brass or gold-plated metal. But in the corner of the tray, Arthur saw something different. It was a silver pocket watch. The metal was polished and bright, even in the dim light of the street lamp. Arthur felt his heart stop for a second. He looked closer. On the back of the watch, there was a beautiful crest. It showed a lion holding a small key. "It is the watch," Arthur whispered. He felt a wave of excitement. This was the watch from the study. This was the watch mentioned in the threatening letter. This was the key to the whole mystery. He looked at the price tag next to it. It was a very high price. The person who sold it knew it was valuable. Arthur tried to turn the handle of the door. The door did not move. It was locked with a heavy iron chain. He looked through the glass and into the back of the shop. There was a small candle burning on a desk. A man was sitting there. He was an old man with a very long beard and small glasses. He was counting coins in the candlelight. Arthur tapped on the glass window. The sound was sharp in the quiet street. The old man did not look up at first. Arthur tapped again, louder this time. Finally, the old man turned his head. He looked at the window with a suspicious expression. He stood up slowly and walked toward the door. "We are closed." The man shouted through the wood. "Go away. Come back in the morning. Please." Arthur called back. "I want to ask about the silver watch in the window. It is very important." The old man stopped. He looked at the silver watch and then back at Arthur. He reached for the key to the door, but then he paused. He looked at the street behind Arthur, as if he was afraid of something. The old man watched Arthur through the glass for a long minute. Finally, he turned the heavy key. The iron chain fell against the wood. He opened the door just a few inches. A smell of old clothes and cold metal came from inside the shop. "I am Mr. Jacobs," the old man said. His voice was thin and dry like old paper. "Why are you at my door so late?" "I told you, we are closed." "I am looking for that silver watch," Arthur said. He pointed to the window. "It was stolen from a very important man. I want to know who brought it to you." Mr. Jacobs looked at the street behind Arthur. He seemed very nervous. He opened the door a bit more and signaled for Arthur to come inside. The shop was very small and very crowded. Shelves reached the ceiling. They were full of silver spoons, old lamps, and musical instruments. Arthur felt like he was in a cave made of history. "I do not want any trouble with the police," Mr. Jacobs whispered. He sat back down at his small desk. "A man came here yesterday evening. The fog was very thick. He looked like he was in a great hurry. He showed me the silver watch. I saw the crest on the back. I knew it was worth a lot of money." "What did he look like?" Arthur asked. He leaned forward. His heart was beating fast. Mr. Jacobs cleaned his glasses with a dirty cloth. He was a tall man. He was not a gentleman. He had very large, rough hands. They were the hands of a man who works outdoors. He wore a long blue coat. It was a special kind of coat, the kind that carriage drivers wear. It had many brass buttons, but one was missing near the collar. Arthur froze. He remembered the morning he arrived at Blackwood Manor. He remembered the carriage sitting in the driveway. The driver, Elias, had been wearing a long blue coat. Did he say anything? Arthur asked. He was very quiet. Jacobs replied. But he smelled of horses and hay. I asked him where he got such a fine watch. He told me it was a gift from his master. He looked scared, though. He kept looking at the door. He took the money and left very quickly. He did not even wait for a receipt. Arthur looked at the silver watch in the window. He felt a mix of anger and sadness. Elias had worked for Lord Blackwood for years. Why would he steal from him? Was he the man in the garden? Or was he working for someone else? "Can I buy the watch?" Arthur asked. He reached for his coins. Mr. Jacobs shook his head. "No. I cannot sell it yet. By law. I must keep it for 3 days before a new person can buy it. That is the rule of the city." Arthur nodded. He knew the law. "Please, Mr. Jacobs, keep it safe. Do not let anyone else take it. It is the only proof of a murder." The old man's eyes went wide. "Murder? You did not say anything about murder." Arthur did not answer. He turned and walked out of the shop. He had a name now. Elias. The carriage driver was the key. He needed to find the driver before the man in the black coat found him first. Arthur walked away from the pawn shop. The air was very cold, and the rain turned into a light mist. He thought about Elias, the carriage driver. He remembered the first morning at Blackwood Manor. He saw the driver waiting by the large black carriage. Elias wore a long blue coat with many brass buttons. Arthur remembered seeing a loose thread near the collar. One button was missing. It was him. Arthur whispered. The driver sold the watch. Arthur felt a cold feeling in his stomach. A driver was a loyal servant. Elias had worked for the family for many years. Why did he have the silver watch? Did he steal it from the desk while Lord Blackwood was dying? Or did someone give it to him to sell? Arthur knew he had to find Elias, but he could not go back to the manor. Inspector Reed was there, and the inspector was not a friend. Arthur knew where the carriage drivers spent their time. There was a large stable near the park. Many rich families kept their horses and carriages there. The drivers lived in small, wooden rooms above the stables. Arthur walked through the dark streets. He felt like a target. He looked behind him every few minutes. He saw many shadows, but the man in the black coat was not there. He reached the stables. The smell of dry hay and horses was very strong. The large wooden doors were open. Inside, it was dark and quiet. Arthur saw many carriages. They looked like giant sleeping birds in the shadows. He looked for the Blackwood carriage. He found it in a far corner. It had the silver lion crest on the door. Arthur looked up at the wooden ceiling. He saw a small yellow light coming from a window above. That was the driver's room. Arthur found the narrow wooden stairs. He climbed them slowly. The wood was old. It made a low, rubbing sound under his boots. He reached the top and stood in front of a small door. He heard voices inside. "I cannot do it," a man said. It was Elias. His voice was shaking. "I already sold the watch. People are asking questions. The police will find out. You will do exactly as you are told." Another voice replied. This voice was deep and very calm. It was the voice of a gentleman, not a servant. "If you do not help us, you will have the same fate as your master. Do you want to die, Elias?" Arthur froze. He held his breath. He moved closer to the door. There was a small crack in the wood. He put his eye to the crack and looked inside. He saw Elias. The driver was sitting on a small bed. He looked very old and very tired. He was holding his head in his hands. Across from him stood a tall man. The man had his back to the door. He wore an expensive dark suit and held a silver cane. "I want that letter," the tall man said. "The clerk has it. You must find him. Bring me the letter, or do not come back." Arthur felt a shiver of pure fear. They were talking about him. They wanted the letter from Mr. X. He had to leave now. But then, the man in the room turned around. Arthur saw his face in the candlelight. It was not the man in the black coat. It was Mr. Sterling, the famous London banker. He was one of Lord Blackwood's oldest friends. Arthur stepped back in shock. His boot hit an empty metal bucket. The sound was very loud in the silent hallway. Inside the room, the voices stopped instantly. "Who is there?" Mr. Sterling shouted. Arthur did not wait. He turned and ran down the stairs as fast as he could. Arthur reached the bottom of the wooden stairs. His heart was hitting his chest like a hammer. He looked around the dark stable. He needed a place to hide. He saw the large Blackwood carriage in the corner. He ran to it and crawled underneath the heavy wooden frame. The ground was cold and covered in straw. He stayed very still and tried to breathe quietly. He heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. A door opened and closed. Then, he saw two pairs of boots walk past the carriage. One pair was expensive black leather. Those belonged to Mr. Sterling. The other pair was old and dusty. Those belonged to Elias. "Find the clerk, Elias," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was cold. "Do not fail me again. I am going back to the bank. Meet me there tomorrow morning." Arthur watched as the expensive boots walked out of the stable. A moment later, he heard the sound of a private carriage moving away on the street. Elias did not leave. The driver stood in the middle of the stable for a long time. He sighed loudly. He looked like a man carrying a very heavy weight. Arthur decided to take a risk. He crawled out from under the carriage. He stood up and brushed the straw from his coat. Elias jumped and turned around. His face was white with fear. He held a lantern up, and the light shook in his hand. "You," Elias whispered. "You are the clerk from the manor." "I am Arthur Miller," Arthur said. He kept his voice steady. "I heard everything. Elias. I know about Mr. Sterling. I know you sold the silver watch to Mr. Jacobs at the pawn shop." Elias looked like he wanted to run, but his legs were too weak. He sat down on a wooden crate. "I had no choice. Mr. Miller. I have debts. I owe money to the wrong people. Mr. Sterling knew this. He told me he would pay my debts if I helped him." "Did you kill Lord Blackwood?" Arthur asked. He stepped closer to the driver. "No," Elias cried. He shook his head quickly. "I would never hurt him. He was a good man. But he was hiding things. Mr. Sterling wanted a specific letter. He told me to find it in the study. I went in there early yesterday morning. But the Lord was already. He was already dead in his chair. Arthur looked at the driver's eyes. Elias looked scared. But he did not look like a murderer. If he was already dead, why did you take the watch? I saw it on the desk. Elias said. He looked at the floor. I knew it was worth a lot of money. I thought I could sell it and run away before Mr. Sterling found me. I was desperate. Arthur reached into his pocket. He pulled out the broken silver link. You tore the watch from his vest. Elias. You broke the chain. That is why I found this. Elias looked at the silver link and started to cry silently. I am a thief. But I am not a killer. Mr. Sterling is the one you should fear. He wanted the secret of the mine. He said the watch was the key to everything. Elias sat on the wooden crate and stared at the silver link in Arthur's hand. His face was grey. He looked much older than he did a few minutes ago. The lantern on the floor cast long, dancing shadows against the stable walls. The horses in the stalls made soft, breathing noises. But otherwise, the stable was very quiet. I told you everything I know, Elias whispered. He wiped his face with a dirty sleeve. I took the watch. I am a bad man for that. But I did not find the letter Mr. Sterling wants. I searched the desk, but there was nothing there. If you didn't find it, why is Mr. Sterling so angry with you? Arthur asked. He watched the driver's eyes. Because he thinks I am lying. Elias cried out. He looked at the dark corners of the stable as if someone was watching. He thinks I am keeping the secrets for myself. But I am just a driver. I don't understand the mine or the debts. I just wanted enough money to leave London. Arthur leaned against the side of the Blackwood carriage. Elias, look at me. Was there anyone else in the house that morning? You said the Lord was already dead when you entered. Elias nodded quickly. I saw a shadow. It was very early. I was coming from the stables to the back door of the manor. I saw a man leaving the garden. He was tall. He wore a long black coat. He did not see me. He moved like a ghost through the fog. The man in the black coat, Arthur said. Is he working for Mr. Sterling? Elias shook his head. I don't think so. Mr. Sterling seemed surprised when I told him about the other man. I think Mr. Sterling is afraid of him, too. There is a war happening, Mr. Miller. A war over Lord Blackwood's ghost. The driver grabbed Arthur's arm. His grip was very tight. You must go. If Mr. Sterling finds you here, he will not be kind. He has many friends in the police. He is a powerful man. What about the symbol? Arthur asked. He remembered the outline he had in his mind about a strange mark. Did you see any strange marks or symbols in the study? Elias looked confused for a second. Then his eyes went wide. In the carriage. This morning, I found a mark on the wall of the carriage. It was not there yesterday. It looked like a drawing of a broken sun. Arthur felt a chill. This was a new piece of the puzzle. He realized that Elias was truly terrified. The man was not a mastermind. He was a victim of his own greed and someone else's plan. Elias was a small man caught between two very dangerous forces. Keep your head down, Elias, Arthur said. Do not tell Mr. Sterling we spoke. I won't, Elias promised. I just want to disappear. Arthur turned and walked toward the stable door. He had more questions now than when he arrived. He had the name of a banker, a story of a hidden brother, and a new symbol to investigate. But most of all, he knew he was being hunted by more than one person. Arthur did not leave the stable immediately. He turned back to look at the Blackwood carriage. It stood in the shadows like a large, dark box. The silver lion on the door seemed to watch him with cold, metal eyes. "Show me the mark, Elias," Arthur said. Elias looked nervous. He picked up the lantern from the floor. He walked to the side of the carriage. The yellow light moved over the dark, polished wood. He pointed to a spot near the back wheel. "There," Elias whispered. "I found it this morning when I was cleaning the mud off the frame." Arthur knelt down. The ground was cold and wet. He looked closely at the wood. Someone had used a sharp knife or a needle to scratch a symbol into the paint. It was a circle with many straight lines coming out of it. It looked like a sun. However, the right side of the circle was missing. It looked like the sun was breaking apart. "A broken sun," Arthur said quietly. He ran his finger over the scratch. The wood felt rough. "This was not done by a child. It is too neat. It is a message." "What does it mean, Mr. Miller?" Elias asked. He was shaking again. "Is it a curse? Did the man in the black coat put it there?" Arthur stood up. He thought about the papers he saw in the iron box. He remembered the photographs of the Silver Star Mining Company. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the documents. There were many stamps and logos on the old contracts. Suddenly, he remembered a small drawing at the bottom of a page. It was the same broken sun. "It is the mark of the mining company," Arthur explained. "The Silver Star. But why is it here? This carriage belongs to the Blackwood family, not the company." "Maybe the company and the family are the same thing now," Elias suggested. Arthur looked at the symbol again. The broken sun felt like a warning. It was as if someone was saying that the light of the Blackwood family was ending. He felt that the person who drew this wanted Arthur to see it. It was a trail of breadcrumbs, leading him deeper into the dark history of the mine. "Elias, did Lord Blackwood ever talk about the sun? Or a star?" The driver shook his head. "No. He only talked about the time. He was obsessed with his watch. But he did receive a package a week ago. It had a wax seal with a symbol. I didn't see it clearly, but it looked like a circle." Arthur realized that the mystery was much bigger than a stolen watch. The watch was a key, but the door it opened led to the Silver Star mine. And that mine was a place of secrets and death. "I must go," Arthur said. He looked at the stable door. "Stay safe, Elias. If you see the man in the black coat, do not talk to him. Just run." Arthur walked out of the stable and into the cold night. The fog was starting to lift, but the air was still heavy. He needed to find a library or a newspaper office. He needed to know what happened at the Silver Star mine 20 years ago. He felt that the broken sun was the key to understanding why Lord Blackwood was dead. The next morning, the sun was bright, but the air remained very cold. Arthur returned to Blackwood Manor. He knew it was dangerous because of Inspector Reed's warning, but he could not stay away. He stood across the street, hidden behind a large stone wall. He watched the front of the house. Suddenly, a beautiful white carriage pulled up to the iron gates. It was much grander than the carriages Arthur usually saw. The horses were tall and strong. The carriage stopped with the heavy sound of wheels grinding against the gravel path. A servant in a white suit opened the carriage door. A woman stepped out. She was tall and very elegant. She wore a long dress of black silk and a hat with a dark veil that covered her face. She moved with great confidence, like a queen entering her palace. She did not look sad. She looked important. Arthur watched as Mr. Henderson, the butler, ran down the front steps to meet her. He bowed very low. He looked surprised and a little bit afraid. The woman spoke to him, but Arthur was too far away to hear her voice. She handed her gloves to the butler and walked straight into the manor as if she owned it. "Who is she?" Arthur wondered. He waited for a few minutes. Then he walked toward the gates. He saw one of the carriage drivers standing near the white horses. The driver was cleaning the silver harness. "Excuse me," Arthur said politely. "That is a very fine carriage. May I ask who has arrived at the manor?" The driver looked at Arthur and then back at the house. "That is Lady Beatrice. She arrived from the countryside this morning. She heard the news about Lord Blackwood and came immediately." "Was she a relative?" Arthur asked. The driver shook his head. "No. People say she was engaged to marry the Lord. They were going to announce the wedding next month. Now, she says she is here to take care of his affairs." Arthur felt a new wave of confusion. Lord Blackwood was an old man who lived alone. Arthur had worked on his legal papers for years, and he never saw a single mention of a wife or a fiancée. Why was she appearing now, only 2 days after his death? Arthur thought about the iron box and the secret mine. He thought about the brother, Thomas. Now there was a lady who claimed to be the future wife. The story was getting more complicated every hour. He realized that Lady Beatrice might be another person looking for the silver watch or the secret letter. He decided he had to speak with her. If she was the Lord's fiancée, she might know about the Mr. X who sent the threats. But he could not just walk through the front door. He needed a plan to get inside without Inspector Reed seeing him. He looked at the servants' entrance at the side of the house and began to walk. Arthur walked around the side of the house. He found the small wooden door used by the delivery men. It was unlocked. He stepped inside and found himself in a narrow, dark hallway. The air smelled of cold stone and old soup. He could hear the voices of the cooks in the kitchen nearby. They were talking loudly about the Lord's death and the grand funeral. Arthur moved quietly in the opposite direction, toward the main part of the manor. He reached the large entrance hall. It was empty. The high ceiling made his soft footsteps sound like echoes. He saw a door open at the end of the hallway. This was the morning room. It was a bright room with many large windows that looked out at the garden. Arthur walked to the door and looked inside. Lady Beatrice was standing by a large fireplace. She had removed her black veil. Her face was very beautiful, but her expression was cold. Her eyes were a sharp, bright blue. She was looking at a large portrait of Lord Blackwood that hung above the fire. She held a lace handkerchief in her hand, but she was not crying. Arthur knocked gently on the open door. Lady Beatrice turned around quickly. She looked at him with surprise. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was high and very clear. "The butler told me there were no visitors allowed today." "My name is Arthur Miller, my lady," Arthur said. He bowed his head. "I am the clerk from the law office. I worked for Lord Blackwood for many years." The woman walked toward him. Her black silk dress moved with a soft, rustling sound on the floor. "A clerk. I see. I am Lady Beatrice. I was the Lord's fiancée. We were to be married in the spring." Arthur looked at her carefully. "I did not know the Lord was engaged. I handled many of his private papers, but I never saw your name, my lady." Lady Beatrice narrowed her eyes. "Our engagement was a secret. Lord Blackwood was a very private man. He had many enemies, Mr. Miller. He wanted to keep me safe until we were husband and wife. But now he is gone, and I must protect his memory." "Did he ever speak to you about his brother, Thomas?" Arthur asked. Lady Beatrice froze. For a second, her face showed fear, but she quickly hid it behind a cold smile. "Thomas is a name from the past. He is not important. What is important is the Lord's estate. I heard that a silver watch is missing from the study. Do you know where it is?" Arthur felt a sense of warning. Everyone was asking about the watch. "I do not have it, my lady. It was stolen." "That watch is a family treasure," she said. She stepped closer to Arthur. He could smell her expensive perfume. "It belongs to me now. If you find it, you must bring it to me. Do not give it to the police." Do not give it to the butler. Do you understand? Arthur realized that Lady Beatrice was not just a grieving woman. She was looking for something, just like Mr. Sterling and the man in the black coat. He did not trust her sharp blue eyes. I will remember that, my lady, Arthur said. He bowed again and started to back out of the room. He needed to leave before she asked him any more questions. As he walked away, he felt her eyes watching him from the doorway. Arthur left the morning room quickly. He did not want Lady Beatrice to follow him or ask more questions. He felt that she was hiding a dark secret behind her beautiful face. He found Clara in a small hallway near the back of the house. She was holding a silver tray, but she looked very lost. Clara. Arthur whispered. We need to find more proof. Lady Beatrice is here now, and she is looking for the watch too. We must find the history of the Silver Star Mine before she does. Clara looked up at the ceiling. The inspector and his men searched the library and the bedrooms. They even looked in the cellar, but they did not go to the attic. It is a very dusty and lonely place. Lord Blackwood never went up there. Take me to the attic, Clara. Arthur said. That is where people hide the things they want to forget. They climbed the narrow back stairs. These stairs were built for the servants and were very steep. The air became warmer and drier as they reached the top of the manor. Finally, Clara opened a small, heavy wooden door. It made a long, low sound as it moved. The attic was a massive room right under the roof. The ceiling was low and slanted. Small, round windows near the floor let in thin lines of grey light. The light was full of dancing dust. There were many tall objects covered in white sheets. In the shadows, they looked like a silent crowd of ghosts. Arthur felt a chill, even though the air was warm. There are so many things here, Clara said. She stayed near the door. She did not like the dark corners of the room. It will take hours to search everything. Arthur walked into the center of the room. His boots made clear footprints in the thick grey dust. He saw old chairs with broken legs, heavy paintings in gold frames, and many wooden trunks. He began to move the boxes. He looked for the name Blackwood or the symbol he saw on the carriage. In a far corner, under a pile of old blankets, he found a large trunk. It was made of dark leather and had heavy silver corners. On the lid, there was a small, scratched symbol. The broken sun. I found something, Clara. Arthur called out. He tried to lift the lid, but it was locked. He did not have the key for this one. He looked around and found a heavy iron bar used for the fireplace. He put the bar under the lock and pushed with all his strength. The metal lock broke with a sharp, loud noise. Arthur lifted the lid. Inside, the trunk was filled with books. They had thick black covers and yellow pages. These were ledgers, books used to record money and business. Arthur picked up the book on top. He wiped the dust from the cover. The date was written in neat ink. 1860. This is it, Arthur said. This is the year the brothers went to the mine. The story is all here. Arthur sat on the dusty floor of the attic. He held the heavy ledger in his lap. Clara walked closer, her eyes wide with curiosity. The air was very still. The only sound was the soft rustle of the old paper as Arthur turned the pages. He found a smaller book at the bottom of the leather trunk. It was not a business ledger. It was a personal diary with a brown leather cover. The initials on the front were HB for Henry Blackwood, the father of the two brothers. Arthur opened it to the middle. The ink was faded, but the writing was strong and angry. Listen to this, Arthur said, his voice a low whisper. He began to read a page from 20 years ago. August 14th. Today, my sons returned from the mountains. They spoke of the Silver Star Mine. Thomas says the gold belongs to both of them. But my younger son, the Lord, tells a different story. He showed me a contract. He says Thomas spent his share on games of cards in the city. He says Thomas is a danger to our family name. Arthur turned the page. The father's writing became more shaky. September 2nd. I have made a terrible choice. I have told Thomas to leave this house forever. I gave the mine and the manor to his brother. But tonight, I found a letter in the library. It was a secret letter from a banker named Sterling. It says my younger son lied to me. He paid Sterling to create a false contract. Thomas did not lose the money. It was stolen from him by his own brother. Clara gasped. She put her hand to her mouth. So the old lord knew. He knew his son was a liar. He knew. Arthur replied, looking at the next page. But he was too proud to change his mind. He was afraid of a scandal. He let Thomas go into the dark, and he lived with the guilt. Look here, Clara. The last page says he hid the true contract inside a silver watch. He said it was the only way to give Thomas his rights if the truth ever came out. Arthur felt the broken silver link in his pocket. He understood everything now. The silver watch was not just a beautiful gift. It was a container for the real contract. If Thomas, or anyone else, had that watch, they could take the manor and the wealth away from the Blackwood name. The watch is a safe. Arthur realized. A very small, portable safe. That is why the letter from Mr. X demanded it. That is why Mr. Sterling wants it back. He helped steal the mine 20 years ago, and he wants to hide the proof forever. Suddenly, the heavy door of the attic moved. It made a long, loud scraping noise on the floorboards. Arthur and Clara froze. A tall shadow appeared on the wall. A man was standing in the doorway, blocking the light from the stairs. The shadow in the doorway did not move. Arthur held the diary tightly against his chest. His heart was beating very fast. Beside him, Clara was shaking. The light from the stairs was behind the figure, so Arthur could not see a face. "Who is there?" Arthur asked. His voice was steady, but his hands were cold. The figure stepped into the dusty attic. It was Mr. Henderson, the butler. He looked very tired. His white hair was messy, and his eyes were full of worry. He looked at the open trunk and the old books on the floor. "Mr. Miller," the butler said quietly, "you must be very careful. The inspector is downstairs in the dining room. Lady Beatrice is in the garden. If they find you here, there will be a great deal of trouble." Arthur stood up and brushed the dust from his trousers. "Mr. Henderson, I found the diary of the old lord. It explains everything. There was a secret between the brothers, and it mentions a specific place in this house." Henderson looked at the brown leather book. He sighed and nodded slowly. The old lord was a man of many secrets. He did not trust anyone, not even his own sons. "What does the book say?" Arthur turned to the very last page of the diary. The ink here was very dark. He read the words aloud. "If the truth must stay hidden from the world, it shall stay behind the walls of wisdom. In the library, where the poets stand, the third lion holds the way." The library. Clara whispered. "That is where the inspector spent all of yesterday. He said he found nothing." The inspector was looking for papers in the desks and drawers. Arthur said. He was not looking for a hidden room. "Henderson, we must go there now, while the house is quiet." They left the attic and walked down the back stairs. They moved like shadows. Every time a floorboard made a soft noise, they stopped and listened. Finally, they reached the heavy oak doors of the library. Henderson pushed them open. The library was a massive room. Thousands of books stood on tall shelves. The air smelled of vanilla and old leather. There were 3 stone statues of lions near the large fireplace. They were smaller than the lion in the garden, but they looked very old. Arthur walked to the third statue. It was a lion sitting on its back legs. Its stone mouth was open in a silent roar. Arthur looked at the statue carefully. He touched the stone head, the paws, and the tail. Nothing moved. The third lion holds the way. Arthur repeated the words from the diary. He looked at the lion's front paw. It was resting on a small stone ball. Arthur tried to turn the ball. It did not move. Then, he tried to push the ball down. He heard a heavy, metallic sound behind the wall. It was the sound of old chains and heavy weights moving. Suddenly, a section of the bookshelf began to move. It did not swing open like a door. Instead, it slid back into the wall and then moved to the right. A dark, narrow opening appeared where the books used to be. A cold, stale wind came from the darkness inside. Arthur stood at the edge of the dark opening. The air coming from the secret room felt very old and smelled like cold stone. He held his lantern high. The yellow light moved into the darkness. He saw a small room with stone walls. There was a single wooden table in the center and a small iron safe on the floor. "We found it," Arthur whispered. He felt a mix of excitement and deep fear. "Please, Mr. Miller," Clara said. She stayed in the library, looking at the door. "We must be quick. The inspector will return soon." Arthur stepped into the secret room. His boots made a soft sound on the stone floor. He walked toward the iron safe. It was small and very heavy. On the top of the safe, there was a small symbol of a lion. He touched the cold metal. He wondered if the silver watch was the only thing that could open this safe. Suddenly, a loud, cold voice echoed through the library. "Stay exactly where you are." Arthur froze. He turned around slowly. Standing in the middle of the library was Inspector Reed. He was not alone. 2 other police officers stood behind him. Reed's face was red with anger. He held a heavy wooden stick in his hand. His gray eyes were like pieces of ice. "I warned you, Mr. Miller," Reed said. He walked toward the open bookshelf. "I told you to go home. I told you this was a police matter." Clara and Henderson stood near the fireplace. They looked down at the floor. They were terrified. Henderson's hands were shaking so much that he dropped the candle he was holding. The flame went out on the rug. Arthur stepped out of the secret room and back into the library. He did not hide the lantern. "Inspector, look. There is a hidden room behind the books. Lord Blackwood was hiding something important. This proves his death was not a natural one." Reed did not look at the secret room. He looked only at Arthur. "What it proves, Mr. Miller, is that you are a thief and a liar. You broke into a dead man's house at night. You used a secret mechanism that only the family should know about." "I am trying to help," Arthur cried. "The truth is in that safe. Lord Blackwood's brother, Thomas, was cheated. This house belongs to him." The inspector stepped very close to Arthur. He was so tall that Arthur had to look up. "You think you are a hero, don't you? You think you know the secrets of the Blackwood family. But you are just a clerk with too much imagination." Reed turned to his officers. "Take Mr. Miller to the police station. Put him in a cell. We will talk about his discoveries in the morning. And take the housekeeper and the butler to the kitchen. I want to speak to them alone." One of the officers grabbed Arthur's arm. The grip was very tight and painful. Arthur looked at the secret room one last time. The shelf was still open. The mystery was right there. But he was being taken away. He felt a deep sense of defeat. He had the golden key. But now he was a prisoner. The walk out of Blackwood Manor was the longest journey of Arthur's life. His hands were bound with heavy iron cuffs that bit into his wrists. The cold night air, which had felt like a mystery to solve only an hour ago, now felt like a weight. As the police led him toward the waiting carriage, Arthur looked up at the darkened windows of the manor. In a high window on the second floor, a curtain moved. For a brief second, he saw the pale, beautiful face of Lady Beatrice. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't crying either. She simply watched him being taken away, like a queen watching a nuisance being cleared from her path. The police station was a grim building made of soot-stained brick. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cheap tobacco, spilled ale, and wet wool. Arthur was marched past a desk where a sleepy sergeant recorded his name in a massive, stained book. Theft and trespassing at Blackwood Manor. Inspector Reed stated, his voice echoing in the stone hallway. Keep him in the back cell. No visitors until I say so. Arthur was pushed into a small, cold cell. The heavy iron door slammed shut with a sound that felt final. The only light came from a single, flickering gas lamp in the hallway. The cell had a narrow wooden bench and a small bucket. The walls were damp, and he could hear the sound of the Thames River somewhere in the distance. He sat on the bench and put his head in his hands. He felt defeated. He had found the secret room, the diary, and the truth about the Silver Star Mine. Yet here he was, branded a criminal. They can lock me up. Arthur whispered to the dark walls. But they haven't found the key. He reached down to his right boot. During the ride in the carriage, he had managed to slip the golden key and the silver link into the thick lining of his leather footwear. The police had searched his pockets, but they had been hurried and arrogant. They hadn't checked his boots. Hours passed. Arthur drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of falling into a deep, dark mine full of silver ghosts. He was woken by the sound of a key turning in the heavy lock of his cell door. He sat up quickly, expecting to see Inspector Reed. Instead, a man stood in the doorway. He was not wearing a police uniform. He wore a long, dark cloak, and his face was partially hidden by the shadows of the hallway. "Mr. Miller," the man said. His voice was deep, raspy, and sounded like two stones rubbing together. "Who are you?" Arthur asked, his heart beginning to race. "Are you from the law office?" The man stepped into the cell. As the light hit his face, Arthur saw a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw. His eyes were dark and full of a strange, fierce intelligence. "I am the man you have been looking for," the stranger said. "And you are the man who has my brother's watch." Arthur stood up, his back against the cold stone wall. "Thomas. You are Thomas Blackwood." The man didn't nod. He simply reached out a gloved hand. "The police think you are a thief. The banker thinks you are a witness. But I know what you really are. Arthur Miller. You are the only person in London honest enough to find the truth. Now, give me the watch, and I will get you out of this cage." Arthur stared at the man standing in his cell. This was the figure who had haunted the London fog, the man who had stood beneath his window and followed him through the dark alleys. Up close, Thomas Blackwood didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man who had been broken and put back together by hard labor and even harder memories. "I don't have the watch, Thomas," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. "It was stolen from the study by your brother's driver, Elias. He sold it to a pawn shop called the Golden Ball." Thomas's jaw tightened. The scar on his face turned a pale, angry white. Elias, that sniveling coward. He always had a wandering eye for silver. He stepped closer, his presence filling the small cell. "And the letter? The one from Mr. X?" "I have it," Arthur said, but he didn't reach for his boot yet. "But I need to know the truth. Did you kill him? Did you kill your own brother?" Thomas looked away, his eyes fixed on the flickering gas lamp in the hall. "I came to the manor that morning to confront him," I wanted to look him in the eye and ask why he stole my life 20 years ago. But when I reached the study window, he was already slumped over. His face was blue. Arthur. He didn't die from a knife or a bullet. He died from a heart full of secrets and perhaps a little help from a friend's medicine. Sterling. Arthur whispered. The banker. Thomas spat the name. Sterling knew that my brother was getting old and guilty. He was afraid the Lord would finally tell the truth and return the Silver Star mine to me. If that happened, Sterling's bank would lose everything. My brother didn't die of natural causes. He was poisoned by the very man he called his partner. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. The guard is returning, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He's been paid to look the other way for 5 minutes. But no longer. We have to move. If Reed finds me here, we both hang. How are we going to get out? Arthur asked, standing up. Thomas reached into his cloak and pulled out a heavy ring of iron keys. He didn't explain how he got them, but the bloodstain on his cuff suggested it hadn't been through polite conversation. He unlocked Arthur's heavy cuffs first, then signaled toward the door. The back exit leads to the river. Thomas whispered. The fog is thick tonight. It's a good night for disappearing. Wait. Arthur stopped him. He reached into his boot and pulled out the golden key and the silver link. I found these. They belong to you. Your father left a diary in the attic. He wanted you to have what was yours. Thomas stared at the tiny golden key in Arthur's palm. For a moment, the fierce intelligence in his eyes softened into something like grief. He took the key with a hand that was surprisingly gentle. You're a strange man, Mr. Miller, Thomas said. Most men in this city would have run away with the gold long ago. I'm a clerk, Arthur replied with a faint, tired smile. I like things to be in their proper place. And right now, the truth is in the wrong place. They slipped out of the cell and moved like shadows through the back hallways of the station. They passed a sleeping guard and emerged into the cold, salty air of the Thames. The river was a churning black mass, and the fog was so dense that the street lamps looked like distant, dying stars. To the pawn shop, Thomas said, pulling his hood over his scarred face. We get the watch, we open the safe in the library, and then we finish this. The journey to the East End felt like a descent into another world. Thomas knew every shortcut, every hidden alleyway where the mud was thickest and the shadows were deepest. Arthur followed him, his heart still hammering against his ribs. The damp cold of the night seeped through his coat, but the adrenaline kept his legs moving. They finally reached the corner where the golden ball stood. The 3 golden balls above the door swung violently in a sudden gust of wind, making a rhythmic, metallic creaking sound. But as they drew closer, Arthur noticed something was wrong. The single gas lamp on the corner had been smashed. The street was pitch black. Wait, Thomas whispered, his hand going to the hilt of a heavy knife tucked into his belt. Look at the window. Arthur squinted through the gloom. The dirty glass window of the pawn shop, the one where the silver watch had sat only hours ago, was gone. In its place was a jagged hole. Shards of glass lay scattered across the cobblestones, glittering like cold diamonds in the moonlight. They moved toward the door. It was hanging open, the heavy iron chain that Arthur had seen before now lying snapped on the floor. From inside the shop, there was a sound of drawers being pulled out and wood being smashed. Thomas didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. Arthur followed, his eyes straining to see in the darkness. The shop was a disaster. The shelves had been cleared, and the floor was covered in silver spoons, old clocks, and broken violins. In the back of the shop, near the small desk, a man was hunched over. He was holding a lantern in one hand and a heavy iron bar in the other. He wore a long blue coat with brass buttons. "Elias!" Arthur shouted. The driver spun around, his face a mask of desperation and terror. When he saw Arthur, he looked relieved for a split second. But when his eyes moved to the scarred, towering figure of Thomas Blackwood, he let out a strangled cry. "The ghost!" Elias whimpered, dropping the iron bar. I told Mr. Sterling I didn't want any more part of this." "Where is the watch?" "Elias." Thomas growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying power. He stepped over a pile of broken porcelain, moving toward the driver like a storm cloud. I couldn't find it." Elias sobbed, backing into a shelf of old books. "I came to take it back, to give it to Mr. Sterling so he would leave me alone. But the old man, he hid it. He wouldn't tell me where." Arthur looked toward the desk. Behind it, he saw a pair of boots sticking out. He ran forward and knelt down. Mr. Jacobs, the old shopkeeper, was lying on the floor. He was alive, but he had a large bruise on his forehead and his hands were tied with a piece of rough rope. "Mr. Jacobs, it's me," Arthur said, quickly untying the knots. "Where is the silver watch? We have to find it before Sterling's men arrive." The old man coughed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Arthur, then at Thomas, and then finally at the driver. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a dirty silk cloth. "I knew they would come," Jacobs whispered. "I took it out of the window the moment you left. Mr. Miller. I felt the evil coming with the fog." He handed the bundle to Arthur. Arthur unwrapped the cloth, and there it was, the silver pocket watch. The lion crest with the key glowed softly in the lantern light. "We have it," Arthur said, standing up. "Not for long." A new voice interrupted. Arthur turned toward the door. Standing in the entrance, silhouetted against the fog, was a group of men. At the front stood Mr. Sterling, his silver-topped cane reflecting the light, and beside him, looking smug and dangerous, was Inspector Reed. The small shop felt like it was shrinking. The smell of rain and expensive tobacco smoke filled the room as Mr. Sterling stepped over the broken glass. He looked around the ruin of the golden ball with a disgusted expression, his silver-topped cane clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. Beside him, Inspector Reed stood with his hand on his pistol, his face a mask of cold authority. "Mr. Miller," Sterling said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm, "you have caused a great deal of trouble for a man who is supposed to be good with numbers. First trespassing, then escaping a police cell. You are adding years to your sentence every hour." "I'm not the one who should be worried about a sentence, Sterling," Thomas growled, his hand tightening on his knife. "I know about the mine. I know about the poison." Sterling let out a soft, dry laugh. "A ghost story from a common criminal. Who will believe you? The word of a disgraced brother against a pillar of the London banking community." He turned his cold gaze to Arthur. "Give me the watch, Miller. Do it now, and perhaps I can convince the inspector to be lenient." Arthur looked at the watch in his hand. The silver felt heavy, not just with metal, but with the weight of 20 years of lies. He noticed something he hadn't seen before. The lion crest on the back, the one holding the tiny key, wasn't just an engraving. The key was a separate piece of metal, slightly raised. "You don't want the watch for its silver, do you, Mr. Sterling?" Arthur asked, his voice gaining strength. "You want what's inside, the true contract for the Silver Star mine." Reed stepped forward, his face reddening. "Enough talk. Hand it over, or we'll take it from your cold fingers." Arthur's thumb found the tiny stone lion. He remembered the diary. The third lion holds the way. He didn't push it. He twisted the lion's head. A sharp click echoed through the shop. The back of the watch didn't just open like a normal pocket watch. It slid to the side, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a tiny, tightly rolled piece of vellum paper, thinner than a leaf. The contract. Thomas whispered. Sterling's calm mask finally broke. Read. Get them. The chaos happened in an instant. Thomas lunged forward, his massive frame colliding with the two officers behind Reed. Elias, seeing his chance for redemption or perhaps just escape, threw a heavy wooden crate at the inspector's feet. Mr. Jacobs blew out the lantern on the desk, plunging the shop into near-total darkness. Run, Arthur. Thomas's voice roared through the shadows. Get the paper to the newspaper office. Don't let him stop you. Arthur didn't wait. He ducked under a swinging arm and scrambled through the broken window. The jagged glass cut his sleeve, but he didn't feel the pain. He hit the wet cobblestones of the street and ran into the thickest part of the fog, the tiny scroll clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Behind him, he heard the sounds of a desperate struggle and Sterling's voice screaming for the police. He knew where he had to go. Fleet Street, the heart of the London press. If he could reach the editors of the Gazette, the truth would be printed before the sun came up, and not even a banker's gold could buy back a secret shared with the whole city. Arthur ran until his lungs felt like they were filled with hot coals. The fog of the East End gave way to the slightly clearer, busier streets of central London, but the danger did not fade. He could hear the rhythmic clatter of horse hooves behind him, a heavy, fast pace that didn't belong to a public hansom cab. It was Sterling's carriage, hunting him through the night. He turned onto Fleet Street. Even at this late hour, the street was alive. This was the heart of London's news, a place that never truly slept. The air here didn't smell of coal or river mud. It smelled of fresh ink, hot lead, and the frantic energy of 1,000 stories being born. Arthur ducked into a narrow doorway marked the London Gazette. He scrambled up a set of back stairs, his boots echoing against the metal risers. He reached the main printing floor. The noise was deafening. Massive iron presses hissed and clanked, shaking the very floorboards beneath his feet. Men in ink-stained aprons moved like ghosts through clouds of steam. I need to see the editor. Arthur shouted at a young boy carrying a stack of fresh papers. It's a matter of life and death. About the Blackwood murder. The boy pointed toward a glass-walled office at the far end of the room. Arthur burst inside without knocking. A man with a thick red beard and a green eyeshade looked up from a messy desk. This was Barnaby Finch, a man known for loving a scandal more than he loved his own dinner. Who the devil are you? Finch barked, dropping his pen. Arthur didn't speak. He reached into his pocket and placed the silver watch and the tiny, yellowed scroll of vellum on the desk. My name is Arthur Miller. I am the clerk who found Lord Blackwood. And this, he pointed to the scroll, is the proof that the Silver Star mine was stolen by the man who just killed him. Finch's eyes sharpened. He picked up a magnifying glass and unrolled the tiny paper. As he read the elegant, faded script of the true contract, his face went from annoyance to pure, professional hunger. God in heaven! Finch whispered. This isn't just a murder. This is the biggest financial fraud in 20 years. Sterling, that snake. Suddenly, the glass door of the office shattered. Inspector Reed stepped through the shards, his face bruised and his coat torn. He looked like a man who had survived a brawl with a bear, and Arthur knew Thomas was that bear. Behind him stood Mr. Sterling, his eyes wild with a desperate, losing fury. Give me the paper, Finch. Reed commanded, drawing his service pistol. It's evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation. This man is a fugitive. Barnaby Finch didn't flinch. He slowly stood up, holding the scroll high. He looked past Reed toward the massive printing presses outside the glass. You're too late, Inspector, Finch said, a cold smile spreading across his bearded face. "My lead compositor just took the transcript. In 10 minutes, 5,000 copies of the morning edition will be hitting the streets. By dawn, every man from the docks to Buckingham Palace will know that Sterling is a thief and you are his errand boy." The roar of the presses seemed to grow louder, a mechanical heartbeat of justice. Sterling slumped against the doorframe, his silver-topped cane falling to the floor. He knew the power of the press was a force that even his gold could not stop. Arthur leaned against the desk, finally letting out the breath he felt he had been holding since that first morning at Blackwood Manor. The silver watch lay on the desk, its tiny lion crest finally at peace. The sun rose over London not with a roar, but with a quiet, pale gold light that cut through the thinning fog. For Arthur Miller, it was the first time in 3 days that the light didn't feel like a threat. The morning edition of the London Gazette was everywhere. It was held by businessmen on omnibuses, read aloud by newsboys on street corners, and whispered about in the hallowed halls of the Bank of England. The headline was simple and devastating: "The Silver Star Scandal. Murder, Mines, and the Fall of a Banking Giant." By noon, Mr. Sterling and Inspector Reed were in custody. The evidence in the secret contract, combined with the diary found in the attic, was an ironclad case. It turned out that Sterling hadn't just poisoned Lord Blackwood's mind with lies. He had been slowly replacing the Lord's heart medicine with a toxic compound, waiting for the perfect moment to seize the final shares of the mine. A week later, Arthur sat in his small office at the law firm. His desk was no longer a mess of scattered papers. It was neat and orderly once again. The ink stain on his rug at home had been cleaned, and his broken door was repaired. Life, it seemed, was trying to return to normal. A heavy knock sounded at the door. Before Arthur could answer, the door swung open. Thomas Blackwood stood there. He was no longer a shadow in a fog-drenched alley. He wore a fine coat of dark wool, and his hair was neatly trimmed. The scar on his face remained, a permanent map of his 20 years in exile, but his eyes were calm. "Mr. Miller," Thomas said, stepping into the room. "Mr. Blackwood," Arthur replied, standing up. "Or should I say, my lord?" Thomas waved a hand dismissively. "The title feels heavy, Arthur. I am still learning how to wear it. But the manor is mine. The mine is being restored to its rightful workers. And the debt to my brother, well, that is between him and God now." He placed a small wooden box on Arthur's desk. "I cannot repay you for the risks you took," Thomas said. "A clerk's salary is small, but a friend's gratitude should be large. I have spoken to your employer. You are no longer a junior clerk. You are now the head of the Blackwood Estate's legal affairs. Should you choose to accept, of course." Arthur looked at the box. Inside, resting on a bed of blue velvet, was a new watch. It was gold, not silver, and on the back, there was no lion or key. Instead, there was a simple engraving. To Arthur, who looked for the truth in the dark, "I accept," Arthur said softly. "The silent witness." After Thomas left, Arthur walked to the window. Below, the streets of London moved with their usual frantic pace. He saw Clara walking through the square, now dressed in a fine new cloak, heading toward her new position as the housekeeper of a reformed Blackwood manor. Lady Beatrice had vanished into the countryside the moment the police arrived, her engagement revealed as a desperate ploy orchestrated by Sterling to gain a foothold in the house. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the old silver watch. Thomas had insisted he keep it as a memento. He looked at the tiny silver lion. The mystery was solved, the ledger was balanced, and the shadows had retreated. He wound the watch. The ticking was steady, a rhythmic reminder that time moves forward, carrying the truth with it, whether we are ready for it or not. He tucked it into his waistcoat, picked up his pen, and began to write. There was, after all, a great deal of paperwork to be done. Arthur Miller sat in his new, spacious office at the Blackwood estate. The mahogany desk was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the flickering light of the green-shaded lamp. He was no longer a junior clerk at the mercy of a senior partner's whims. He was the guardian of the Blackwood legacy. Yet, as he looked at the massive pile of old ledgers brought from the manor's secret room, he felt a familiar prickle of unease. While the city celebrated the arrest of Sterling and Reed, Arthur remained occupied with the numbers. Sterling had been a banker, and bankers were meticulous. As Arthur cross-referenced the Silver Star Mine's output from 20 years ago, he found a pattern that did not make sense. The mine had produced silver, yes, but there were shipments marked with a specific symbol, a small, blackened sun, that never appeared in the official bank deposits. These were private sales. Arthur whispered, tapping his pen against his chin. Sterling wasn't just stealing the mine, he was hiding what they were digging up. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Thomas Blackwood. He looked revitalized, though the scar on his face seemed to darken whenever he spoke of the past. He carried a heavy iron key, much larger than the one for the silver watch. "I found this in the cellar of the manor, Arthur," Thomas said, placing the heavy object on the desk. It was hidden inside a hollow brick behind the wine racks. "My father never mentioned it, and it doesn't fit any door in the house." Arthur examined the key. It was made of cold, dark iron, and the handle was shaped into the likeness of a weeping woman. "It looks like a gate key, my lord. Perhaps for a cemetery or a private vault." Thomas shook his head. "I think it belongs to the north, to the mine itself. My brother stopped visiting the Silver Star 5 years ago. He told the servants it was dry, but the taxes he paid suggested otherwise. He was paying for security, armed men to guard an empty hole in the ground." Arthur opened a map of the Northern Territories. The Silver Star mine sat in a jagged valley, surrounded by treacherous peaks and ancient forests. It was a week's journey by train and carriage. "If the mine is empty, why guard it?" Arthur asked. "And why did your father feel the need to hide this key so carefully?" "That is what we must find out," Thomas replied. "I have a carriage waiting. The police think the case is closed, but I feel the weight of that mountain on my soul. Will you come with me, Arthur? I need a man who can read the truth between the lines of a ledger." Arthur looked at his comfortable office, then at the dark iron key. The mystery had not ended with Sterling's arrest, it had simply moved from the streets of London to the heart of the earth. He picked up his coat. "I'll fetch my inkwell and my boots, my lord. We shouldn't keep the mountain waiting." Before they could depart for the north, Arthur insisted on one final stop. He knew that secrets in London often flowed toward the river. If Sterling had been shipping private cargo from the Silver Star mine, it would have passed through the hands of the dockworkers in the East End. The air at the London docks was thick with the scent of salt, rotting fish, and the heavy, sweet smell of tobacco. Thomas and Arthur walked along the wooden piers, their footsteps muffled by the thick evening mist. Thomas pulled his cloak tight. He was a man of the mountains, and the damp cold of the river seemed to irritate him. "We are looking for a man named Old Barnaby," Arthur explained. "He's been a foreman here for 40 years. If a crate with a blackened sun passed through these wharves, he would have seen it." They found Barnaby in a small, cramped office overlooking the dark water. He was a man made of leather and grit, his hands gnarled from decades of hauling rope. When Arthur mentioned the Silver Star and showed him a sketch of the symbol, Barnaby's eyes darted to the door. "You shouldn't be asking about that, Mr. Miller," Barnaby whispered, his voice like grinding gravel. "Those crates didn't go to the banks. They didn't go to the jewelers, either." "Where did they go?" Thomas demanded, stepping into the light. Barnaby recoiled slightly at the sight of Thomas's scar. "They were loaded onto ships with no names, my lord. Black sails, quiet crews. They always arrived at the dark of the moon. The men who came for the cargo, they didn't speak English. They didn't speak much of anything. They wore heavy robes, even in the heat of summer." Arthur leaned in. What was in the crates? Was it silver? Barnaby shook his head slowly. It was heavy like silver, but it shone differently in the lantern light. It had a blue tint to it. And it was cold. Not just metal cold, but death cold. One of my boys touched a piece of it by accident. His hand turned black within the hour. We had to take him to the surgeon to have the fingers removed. Thomas and Arthur exchanged a look. This was not a story of common theft. This was something much darker. Sterling was a greedy man. Arthur mused as they left the office. But he was a man of gold and coins. He wouldn't deal in cursed metal unless someone was paying him a fortune to look the other way. The Order of the Broken Sun. Thomas said, his voice low. I remember hearing the name in the mining camps. I thought it was just a ghost story told by the old-timers to scare the young boys away from the deep shafts. It seems the ghost story has a shipping manifest. Arthur replied. We need to get to that mine, Thomas. Whatever they were digging up, it wasn't meant for the world of men. The train journey north was long and rhythmic. Arthur spent the hours studying the Iron Key, while Thomas stared out at the passing English countryside. As they pulled into the station at Durham, the last major stop before the wilderness, a woman stood on the platform. She was not Lady Beatrice. She was shorter, with hair the color of autumn leaves and a dress of deep, blood-red velvet. She stood perfectly still as the steam from the engine swirled around her. As Arthur stepped onto the platform to stretch his legs, she approached him. You are the clerk, Arthur Miller, she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was melodic but carried a strange, metallic edge. I am. Arthur replied, instinctively reaching for the pocket where he kept the silver watch. And you are? A friend of the truth, she said. My name is Juliana. I worked at the Silver Star when the light was still bright. I was the Lord's translator when the foreign buyers came. Thomas stepped down from the carriage, his hand on his cane. You were there. During the fraud. Juliana turned to him, her expression softening. I was there when your brother was still a good man, Thomas Blackwood. Before the mountain whispered to him. He didn't want to steal from you at first. He was terrified. He thought that by taking the mine, he could keep the others away. He thought he could bury the secret under his own name. What others? Arthur asked. The Order. Juliana replied. They don't want the silver. They want the heart of the star. It's a stone that fell from the sky 1,000 years ago. The silver grew around it like a shell. Sterling was just their servant. He handled the logistics, the money, and the silence. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, dried flower. It was a lily, but its petals were a strange, shimmering blue. This grew near the mine entrance. The land is changing. The water is turning cold. If you go up there with just a key and a legal mind, you will not return. Are you warning us to stay away? Thomas asked. I'm telling you that the mine is no longer a mine. Juliana said. It is a temple, and they are waiting for the true heir to return. They need the Blackwood blood to unlock the final chamber. Sterling failed them, so they let him fall. Now they want you. Before Thomas could ask another question, the station master blew his whistle. The train was ready to depart for the final leg of the trip. Juliana backed away into the shadows of the station. Wait. Arthur called out. Why tell us this? Because, she said, her voice fading, I want the mountain to go silent again. And only a Blackwood can close the door. The train journey ended at a lonely whistle stop called Crow's End. From there, the world of steam and iron gave way to a landscape of jagged rock and ancient, gnarled pines. The air was no longer merely cold. It was biting, carrying a metallic tang that made Arthur's teeth ache. They hired a local carriage, a sturdy, weather-beaten thing pulled by two mountain horses with thick, shaggy coats. The driver, a man whose face was hidden behind a heavy wool scarf, refused to speak a word after Thomas mentioned their destination. As the carriage climbed higher into the Pennines, the road narrowed until it was little more than a shelf of stone clinging to the mountainside. To their left, a sheer drop fell away into a valley choked with a thick, unnatural fog that didn't move with the wind. To their right, the mountain rose like a dark wall, scarred by old mining tunnels that looked like hollow eyes watching their progress. "My father used to say these mountains were older than time itself," Thomas remarked, his voice barely audible over the rattling of the wheels. He was staring at the iron key in his lap. "He said the Romans came here for lead, but they left in a hurry. They found something they couldn't name." Arthur clutched his leather bag. Inside, the ledgers and the silver watch felt like heavy anchors. "I spent my life in London thinking the world was made of brick and mortar, Thomas. But out here, it feels like the earth is just a thin crust over something much larger." The horses began to lather, their breath coming in great white plumes. The higher they climbed, the more the flora changed. The familiar green of the pines gave way to a sickly, pale grey. The trees were stunted and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Arthur noticed patches of the blue lilies Juliana had shown them. They grew in clusters near the dark openings of the old shafts, glowing with a faint, ghostly light that seemed to pulse in time with the carriage's movements. "Look there," Arthur pointed. High above them, perched on a jagged spur of rock, stood a structure that did not belong in the wilderness. It was a tall, slender tower made of the same dark stone as the mountain, but its surface was polished until it shone like glass. At the very top, a large circular window caught the dying light of the sun. It looked like a giant eye, unblinking and cold. "The observatory," Thomas whispered. "My brother built it 10 years ago. He told the family it was for studying the stars. But look at the angle of the glass, Arthur. It isn't pointed at the sky. It's pointed down, toward the entrance of the silver star." The sun dipped below the horizon, and the world was plunged into a deep, bruised purple. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of the horses' hooves. It was a silence that felt heavy, as if the mountain were holding its breath, waiting for the Blackwood air to finally step back into the dark. They reached the village of Blackwood Hollow just as the first stars appeared. It was a miserable cluster of stone cottages huddled together in a deep ravine, looking as if they were trying to hide from the wind. There were no lights in the windows, and no smoke rose from the chimneys, despite the freezing temperatures. The carriage stopped in front of a building that bore a faded sign. "The Frozen Star." The driver practically threw their bags onto the frozen ground, turned his horses around, and vanished back into the mist without waiting for his pay. "Charming," Arthur muttered, picking up his suitcase. He shivered as a gust of wind whistled through the narrow street. The sound was high-pitched, almost like a human scream. They entered the inn. The interior was dim, lit only by a dying fire in a massive stone hearth. A few men sat at a long wooden table, their faces shadowed by heavy hoods. They didn't look up when the door opened. The air inside was stale, smelling of wet earth and something sharp, like vinegar. "A room for two," Thomas said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "And a hot meal, if you have it." A man behind the bar, whose skin looked like grey parchment, stared at them with milky, sightless eyes. He didn't move for a long minute. Then, he raised a hand, or what remained of one. 3 of his fingers were missing, the stumps healed into smooth, blackened knobs. "The master's brother has come home," the innkeeper whispered. The men at the table suddenly went still. One of them slowly turned his head. His eyes were wide and vacant, reflecting the faint blue glow of a lamp on the wall. "We don't want any trouble," Arthur said, stepping forward. "We are here on legal business regarding the estate." The innkeeper let out a dry, rattling laugh. "Legal business? The mountain doesn't care for your papers, Clark. It only cares for the blood. He pointed a gnarled finger toward the far wall. Arthur followed the gesture. Carved into the dark wood of the wall was a mural. It depicted the mountain, but it was split open like a piece of fruit. Inside the fruit was a giant, multifaceted star, and gathered around it were figures in robes, their faces turned upward in a silent shout. Below the star was the symbol they had seen so many times now, the broken sun. "They came for the heart 20 years ago," the innkeeper said. "Your father gave them his firstborn to keep them quiet. Now you've come back to finish the trade." "My father gave them nothing," Thomas roared, slamming his cane against the floor. "He was cheated by a banker and a liar." "Was he?" the man replied, his sightless eyes seemingly looking right through Thomas. "Or did he just choose the son who would be easier to sacrifice?" That night, Arthur didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the dark silhouette of the mountain. He could hear a low, rhythmic thumping coming from deep underground, a sound like a giant heart beating in the dark. The next morning broke grey and silent. Thomas and Arthur left the village on foot, carrying only what they could fit in their packs. The path toward the Silver Star mine was steep and treacherous, overgrown with a strange, pale grey moss that seemed to thrive in the shadow of the peaks. As they climbed, the temperature plummeted. Arthur's breath froze on his scarf, and his fingers felt like blocks of wood inside his gloves. Thomas, however, seemed energized. He moved with a grim determination, his eyes fixed on the massive stone archway that loomed ahead. Finally, they reached the entrance. It wasn't the wooden-propped tunnel Arthur had expected. Instead, the mountain had been carved into a grand, terrifying gateway. Two massive stone pillars, shaped like twisting vines, supported a heavy lintel, and set into the rock was a door of solid, dark iron. "The Iron Gate," Thomas said, his voice full of awe. "I remember the miners talking about this. They said it was built by the old ones long before the first Blackwood ever found a speck of silver here." The gate was covered in intricate carvings. They showed the history of the world, but it was a history Arthur didn't recognize. There were strange beasts, cities that looked like they were made of glass, and a great war between the sun and the stars. In the center of the door was a single, small keyhole. Arthur pulled the iron key from his pocket, the one with the weeping woman on the handle. It felt impossibly cold, even through his gloves. "Are you sure about this, Thomas?" Arthur asked. "The innkeeper, he said they were waiting for you." "I am a Blackwood, Arthur," Thomas replied, his jaw set. "This land was stolen from me, and my brother was murdered for what lies behind this door. I won't turn back now." Arthur stepped forward and placed the key in the lock. It didn't turn at first. He felt a strange vibration, a low hum that traveled up his arm and settled in his chest. Then, the weeping woman on the handle began to glow with a soft, blue light. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent mountain air. The heavy iron gate didn't swing open. It began to sink into the ground, moving with a smoothness that suggested a complex, ancient mechanism. As the door disappeared, a blast of air hit them. It was freezing, smelling of ozone and ancient, stale incense. Beyond the gate lay a tunnel that stretched into total darkness. But it wasn't silent. From the depths, Arthur could hear a sound, a soft, melodic whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was 1,000 voices speaking at once, in a language that sounded like the tinkling of bells and the cracking of ice. "They're calling us," Arthur whispered, his fear replaced by a strange, numb curiosity. "Then let's not keep them waiting," Thomas replied, stepping into the dark. The tunnel was perfectly circular, its walls as smooth as polished marble. There were no wooden supports, no picks or shovels, and no smell of coal. Instead, the air was lit by a vein of blue crystal that ran along the ceiling, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light. As they walked deeper into the mountain, The whispering grew louder. It wasn't just in the air. It was in Arthur's head. He felt memories that weren't his, the heat of a falling star, the cold of a frozen ocean, the feeling of 1,000 years passing in a single heartbeat. "Do you hear it, Arthur?" Thomas asked. He was walking with a strange, fluid grace, his limp seemingly gone. "I hear everything," Arthur replied, rubbing his temples. "It's like the mountain is trying to tell us its life story." They reached a vast cavern. It was so large that the blue light from the ceiling couldn't reach the floor. In the center of the space stood a structure that looked like a temple. It was built of the same blue-tinted metal Barnaby had described at the docks. Steps led up to a high altar, where a single, glowing object rested. But they weren't alone. Gathered around the altar were 12 figures. They wore long, heavy robes of dark blue velvet, their faces hidden behind masks made of polished silver. The masks were shaped like the broken sun. They stood in perfect silence, their hands folded in front of them. One of the figures stepped forward. He didn't walk. He seemed to glide across the stone floor. When he reached the bottom of the altar steps, he removed his mask. Arthur gasped. The man didn't look like a cultist or a criminal. He was older, with refined features and a calm, scholarly expression. He looked like a professor or a doctor. "Welcome home, Thomas," the man said. His voice was the same one Arthur had heard in the whispering walls. "We have been expecting you for a very long time." "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, holding his cane like a sword. "I am the chronicler," the man replied. "I am the one who records the songs of the stars. Your brother was a good man, Thomas, but he was weak. He could not bear the weight of the song. He thought he could bury it, hide it away in London offices and bank vaults. But the heart must be fed." He pointed to the altar. The glowing object was a jagged, dark stone that seemed to drink the light around it. Tiny sparks of blue electricity jumped from its surface to the metal of the altar. "The silver star is not a mine," the chronicler continued. "It is a tomb for a god that fell before man knew fire. And now, the heir has returned to provide the key." He looked at Arthur. "And you, little clerk, you have brought the watch, the final piece of the mechanism. Give it to us, and you may walk out of this mountain alive." Arthur felt the cold weight of the silver watch in his pocket. It seemed to pulse, vibrating against his hip in a frantic, irregular rhythm that matched the flickering of the blue crystals above. He looked at the chronicler, then at the 12 masked figures who stood as still as statues. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of ozone and something ancient, like the dust of a tomb that had been sealed for an eternity. "The watch is more than a container for a contract, Mr. Miller," the chronicler said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. The man who made it was not just a jeweler. He was a master of celestial mechanics. The gears inside are tuned to the frequency of the heart. It is the only thing that can stabilize the energy of the stone. Thomas stepped in front of Arthur, his scarred face illuminated by the eerie blue glow. "My father spent his life trying to keep you away from this place. He knew what you were. He knew that the heart brings nothing but madness and death." The chronicler smiled, a thin, pitying expression. "Your father was a man of the earth, Thomas. He saw only the surface. He feared the power because he could not control it. He thought that by hiding the watch and the key, he could stop the inevitable. But the stars do not wait for the fears of men." The masked figures began to hum. It was a low, vibrating sound that made the very air in the cavern shimmer. Arthur felt the silver watch grow hot in his hand. He pulled it out, and the silver surface was no longer dull. It was glowing with a fierce, white light. The hands of the watch were spinning wildly, clockwise and then counterclockwise, as if time itself were being unraveled. "Give it to me, Arthur," the chronicler commanded, extending his hand. If the heart is not stabilized, the mountain will collapse. The village below, the secrets you seek, everything will be crushed under the weight of a dying star. Arthur looked at the heart on the altar. The dark stone was beginning to crack, and from the fissures, a blinding blue light was leaking out. He looked at Thomas, whose eyes were wide with a mix of terror and awe. If I give it to him, Thomas, we lose everything. Arthur whispered. If I don't, we might not survive the minute. The watch is the key to the lock, but it is also the brake for the engine. Thomas replied, his voice strained. My father's diary. It said the third lion holds the way. It wasn't just about the library in London. Look at the altar. Arthur looked. Carved into the base of the metal altar were 3 stone lions, identical to the ones in Blackwood Manor. The third lion, however, was missing its front paw. The silver link. Arthur realized. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken piece of the watch chain, the small silver link he had found in Lord Blackwood's study. It was shaped exactly like the missing paw. The clerk is smarter than I anticipated. The chronicler hissed, his calm demeanor finally cracking. But knowledge is not power without the will to use it. With a sudden, violent movement, the chronicler gestured toward the masked figures. They broke their circle and moved toward Arthur and Thomas, their silver masks reflecting the chaotic light of the waking star. The 12 masked men moved with a terrifying, synchronized grace. They didn't run. They drifted across the stone floor like shadows cast by a flickering candle. Thomas swung his heavy cane, the wood cracking against a silver mask. The man went down, but he didn't make a sound, no cry of pain, no gasp of breath. It was as if they were empty shells, driven by a singular, external will. Get to the altar, Arthur! Thomas shouted, parrying a blow from a robed figure. I'll hold them back. Arthur scrambled toward the metal structure, his boots slipping on the smooth stone. The air was becoming difficult to breathe, charged with an electric tension that made his hair stand on end. He reached the base of the altar and knelt before the third lion. The chronicler roared in fury, a sound that was no longer human. It was a metallic screech that echoed off the cavern walls. He lunged toward Arthur, his fingers hooked like claws. But before he could reach the clerk, a bolt of blue lightning arced from the heart of the star, striking the chronicler in the chest and throwing him back against the cavern wall. The stone was waking up, and it didn't distinguish between friend and foe. Arthur fumbled with the small silver link. His hands were shaking so much he almost dropped it. He found the indentation in the stone lion's leg. The link, the paw, fit perfectly. He pushed it in with all his strength. A deep, mechanical groan vibrated through the floor. The altar began to rotate, the heavy blue metal grinding against the stone. As it turned, a series of lenses and mirrors inside the temple structure aligned. The wild, chaotic light of the heart was caught and funneled into a single, focused beam. The watch. Arthur! Put the watch in the beam. Thomas yelled, struggling against 3 attackers at once. Arthur held the glowing silver watch into the path of the blue light. The moment the beam hit the silver casing, the watch began to hum a perfect, clear note, a C-sharp that resonated through the entire mountain. The spinning hands of the watch suddenly stopped. They pointed to 12 o'clock, then snapped backward to 6. The effect was instantaneous. The blue light changed from a violent, flickering electric blue to a soft, steady sapphire. The whispering in Arthur's head ceased, replaced by a profound, cool silence. The heart on the altar stopped cracking. The fissures began to close as if the stone were healing itself. The masked figures stopped their assault. They stood perfectly still. Then, one by one, they collapsed to the floor like marionettes with their strings cut. Their silver masks clattered onto the stone, revealing faces that were pale and vacant, as if they had been asleep for 100 years. The chronicler slumped against the wall, his fine clothes charred and smoking. He looked at Arthur with eyes that were no longer calm, but filled with a profound, existential dread. "You have silenced the song," the chronicler whispered, his voice fading. "But the stars, they never forget a note. You have only delayed the inevitable." He closed his eyes, and his body seemed to wither, turning into a fine grey ash that was caught by the cold draft of the tunnel and blown away into the dark. Arthur stood up, his legs feeling like jelly. He looked at the silver watch. It was no longer glowing, but it felt warm in his hand, alive in a way it hadn't been before. "Is it over?" Arthur asked, his voice echoing in the sudden, heavy quiet. Thomas walked over, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at the collapsed figures and the silent altar. "For now, Arthur, my father's secret is safe. The heart is back in its cradle." But as Arthur looked down at the watch, he saw that the hands were no longer moving at all. They were frozen at 6 o'clock. And on the face of the watch, a new symbol had appeared, etched into the glass from the inside. A perfect, unbroken sun. The descent from the Silver Star mine felt like walking through a dream that was slowly fading into the grey reality of a winter morning. Arthur and Thomas moved in a profound, heavy silence. The mountain, which had hissed and whispered with the voices of 1,000 years only an hour before, was now as still as a tomb. The blue crystals in the ceiling had dimmed to a dull, milky white, their pulse extinguished by the stabilizing power of the watch. As they emerged from the iron gate, the morning sun was struggling to pierce through the thick mountain mist. The air was no longer sharp with the scent of ozone. It simply smelled of damp stone and pine needles. Arthur turned back to look at the great gateway. The iron door had remained sunken into the earth, a permanent invitation, or a warning, to those who might follow in their footsteps. "It feels different, doesn't it?" Thomas asked, his voice sounding thin in the vast open air. He leaned on his cane, his eyes scanning the jagged horizon. "The mountain, it's just rock and ice again. It's resting," Arthur replied, his hand unconsciously drifting to the waistcoat pocket where the silver watch sat. He could feel its warmth through the fabric. It didn't tick, but it hummed with a low-frequency vibration that he felt in his very marrow. "But I don't think it's the same rock it was yesterday." They began the long trek down to Blackwood Hollow. When they reached the village, the change was even more apparent. The oppressive, fearful atmosphere that had choked the streets had lifted. A few chimneys were finally puffing out thin trails of wood smoke, and for the first time, Arthur saw a child, a small boy in a tattered coat, chasing a scrawny dog across the frozen mud of the square. They returned to the Frozen Star. The innkeeper with the sightless eyes was standing by the door, his head tilted as if listening to a sound only he could hear. As Thomas and Arthur approached, the man bowed his head low. "The song has changed," the innkeeper whispered. "The broken sun has mended. You have brought the long night to an end, my lord." "I have only done what my father should have done 20 years ago," Thomas said firmly. "The mine is closed. Silas, tell the men. There will be no more digging in the deep shafts. We will find our wealth in the timber and the wool of the valleys, not in the dark of the stars." Arthur went upstairs to their small room to pack their few belongings. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the watch. The unbroken sun etched into the glass was perfect, its rays extending to the very edges of the frame. He tried to pry the back open, but it was sealed tight, as if the silver had fused into a single, solid piece of metal. He realized then that he was no longer the owner of a watch. He was the bearer of a seal. The chronicler had called him a little clerk, but as Arthur looked at his reflection in the polished silver, he saw a man whose eyes had seen the birth of light in the heart of the earth. He was no longer just Arthur Miller of London. He was the witness to the unbroken sun. The train ride back to London was a blur of clicking tracks and soot-stained windows. Thomas spent most of the journey asleep, his face finally losing the tension that had gripped it since his return from exile. But Arthur remained awake, his ledger open on his lap. He wasn't recording finances anymore. He was writing down everything he remembered about the symbols, the lenses, and the words of the chronicler. If it happened here. Arthur mused, his pen scratching against the paper. It could happen elsewhere. The Silver Star was just one eye looking down. When they arrived at King's Cross Station, the bustling noise of London felt like a physical blow. The shouting of porters, the clatter of hansom cabs, and the thick, coal-heavy smog were a far cry from the ethereal silence of the Pennines. They were met by a private carriage emblazoned with the Blackwood crest. "Take Mr. Miller to his office first," Thomas instructed the driver. He turned to Arthur, grasping his hand with a strength that surprised the clerk. "You've done more than your duty. Arthur, take some time. The estate can wait for a few days." "I don't think I can rest, Thomas," Arthur admitted. "There are things in the London archives I need to check. If Sterling was shipping that blue metal, there must be records of where it landed. The chronicler is gone, but the order might still have roots in the city." Arthur returned to the Blackwood estate offices. The staff looked at him with a new kind of respect, and a hint of fear. Word had spread of the business trip to the north, though none knew the true nature of what had occurred. He locked himself in his office and ignored the stacks of pending contracts. He spent the evening poring over old shipping manifests and geological surveys. At midnight, he found it. A small entry in a maritime ledger from 10 years ago. It detailed a shipment of industrial minerals arriving at a private wharf in Southwark. The consignee wasn't a bank or a mining company. It was the Society for the Study of Ancient Light. Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He pulled out the watch. The hands were still frozen at 6, but as he looked at the symbol of the unbroken sun, he noticed a tiny, microscopic dot of red light at the very center of the engraving. It was blinking, a slow, steady pulse, like a beacon. "It's not over," Arthur whispered to the empty room. "It's just beginning." He realized the watch wasn't just a stabilizer. It was a compass, and it was pointing toward a tall, nondescript townhouse in the heart of London's most prestigious district. The Order of the Broken Sun had been a cult of the mountains, but the Society for the Study of Ancient Light sounded like something far more dangerous, a cult of the elite. The following morning, Arthur dressed with more care than usual. He wore his finest wool coat and carried a leather briefcase, looking every bit the high-level legal representative of a powerful estate. He made his way to Mayfair, to the address he had discovered in the shipping manifests. The house was a grand, 4-story building made of Portland stone. It had no sign, no brass plate, and the windows were draped with heavy velvet curtains. To any passerby, it looked like the home of a wealthy, if reclusive, gentleman. But Arthur's watch was vibrating so intensely in his pocket that he could feel the heat through his trousers. He climbed the steps and rang the bell. A footman in a grey livery opened the door. He had the same vacant, glassy-eyed expression Arthur had seen on the masked men in the mountain. "I am Arthur Miller, representing the Blackwood estate," Arthur said, his voice firm. "I believe your society has certain outstanding business with the Silver Star mine that requires clarification." The footman didn't speak. He simply stepped aside and gestured for Arthur to enter. The interior of the house was a temple to wealth and weirdness. The walls were lined with astronomical maps that dated back to the Middle Ages, and the air was filled with the rhythmic ticking of 100 different clocks, none of which seemed to show the same time. He was led into a large drawing room where a man was standing by a fireplace. He was tall and thin, with white hair and a sharp, hawkish nose. He was holding a glass of sherry, but his eyes were fixed on a large, glowing orb of blue glass that sat on the mantelpiece. "The clerk," the man said, not turning around. "I must say, Sterling was a fool to underestimate you. He thought you were just a man of paper. He didn't realize that paper is just the skin of the truth. And you are the heart of the lie." I assume, Arthur replied, his hand tightening on his briefcase. The man turned. He looked elegant and sophisticated, but there was a hollowness to his face, as if something had been scooped out of him from the inside. I am Lord Vane. I am the president of this society. We do not deal in lies. Mr. Miller, we deal in the inevitable. The ancient light is returning to this world, and your little intervention in the north was merely a momentary flicker in a much larger lamp. The heart is stable, Arthur said. The mountain is quiet. Lord Vane laughed, a dry, papery sound. The mountain was but one vessel. Do you think a god falling from the sky breaks into only one piece? The heart you saw was the smallest shard. The others are scattered across the globe, and they are all beginning to wake. He pointed to the blue orb on the mantle. It was pulsing with the exact same rhythm as Arthur's watch. You have the watch, the primary regulator. Vane continued, stepping closer. With it, we can sync the other shards. We can bring the full light of the unbroken sun to London. Imagine, Mr. Miller, no more coal smoke, no more darkness, no more death. A city powered by the stars themselves. At what cost? Arthur asked. I saw the men in the mountain. They weren't men anymore. They were husks. Vane's eyes flashed with a cold, fanatical light. A small price for immortality. Now, give me the watch. You are out of your depth, Clark. You are playing a game with pieces you cannot even name. Lord Vane took a step toward Arthur, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the ornate rug. The ticking of the 100 clocks in the room seemed to accelerate, becoming a frantic, mechanical heartbeat that vibrated in Arthur's teeth. The blue orb on the mantelpiece flared with an intense, sickly light, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping fingers. You speak of husks, Mr. Miller, because you fear the loss of your small, tedious identity. Vane said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic whisper. But imagine being part of a celestial harmony. No more ledgers, no more ink-stained fingers, no more petty laws of men. Only the light. I like my ink-stained fingers, my lord. Arthur replied, his hand tightening on the silver watch in his pocket. And I quite like the laws of men. They keep people like you from stealing things that don't belong to them. Vane's face darkened. He made a sharp gesture with his hand. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath Arthur's feet groaned. The room wasn't just a drawing room. It was a massive piece of clockwork. Sections of the floor began to slide away, revealing a churning abyss of brass gears and spinning iron teeth below. Arthur jumped back, pressing his spine against the cold stone of the fireplace. The watch, Arthur, Vane demanded, his elegance replaced by a raw, hungry desperation. Give it to me, or you will become a part of the machinery. The silver watch began to burn, not with heat, but with a freezing, numbing cold that turned Arthur's hand white. He pulled it out, and the symbol of the unbroken sun was no longer red. It was a blinding, pure gold. The light hit the blue orb on the mantle, and for a second, the two objects seemed to scream at each other. The blue orb began to vibrate so violently that the glass cracked. A bolt of erratic energy arced out, striking one of the massive clocks on the wall. The clock exploded in a shower of springs and brass cogs. Arthur saw his opening. He didn't run for the door. The footman was surely waiting there. Instead, he lunged for a heavy velvet curtain, pulling it down with all his weight. The heavy fabric fell across the sliding floorboards, jamming the gears with a screech of tortured metal. The house shuddered, a deep groan of failing machinery echoing through the walls. Vane stumbled, his glass of sherry shattering on the floor. You've broken the synchronization. Vane shrieked. I'm a clerk. Arthur shouted over the din. I'm very good at finding errors in the system. Arthur scrambled over the jammed floor and threw himself through the large bay window. The glass shattered, and he landed hard on the cold pavement of the Mayfair Street. He didn't stop to check for injuries. He ran, the silver watch pulsing in his hand like a frantic bird, its golden light illuminating the fog of London like a beacon. He needed Thomas, and he needed to find the center of the web before Vane could reset the clock. Arthur reached Blackwood Manor drenched in sweat and gasping for air. Thomas was in the study, surrounded by old maps of the London Underground, the massive project of tunnels and rails currently carving its way through the city's belly. "Arthur, you look like you've been through a war," Thomas said, rushing to help him. "Vane, the Society, they have more shards." Arthur panted, laying the silver watch on the desk. Its golden glow was fading, replaced by a steady, rhythmic thrum. He said the mountain was just one vessel. "They are trying to sink them all here, in London." Thomas pointed to a map of the city's financial district. "I've been tracing the shipments." "Arthur, Sterling wasn't just shipping metal to Mayfair. Most of the cargo went deep underground. There's a central vault beneath the Bank of England, older than the bank itself. My father's papers mentioned a foundation stone that the city was built upon. The heart of the star." Arthur realized. The largest piece. Vane wants to use the watch as a tuning fork. If he connects the watch to the foundation stone, the entire city becomes a conductor for the ancient light. "Then we have to go down," Thomas said, grabbing a heavy iron lantern and his cane. The construction crews found a series of ancient tunnels last month. They were sealed by order of the board of directors, Sterling's friends. They made their way through the dark, echoing tunnels of the unfinished underground. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and coal dust. As they drew closer to the heart of the city, the walls began to change. The brick and mortar gave way to smooth, dark stone, the same stone as the Silver Star mine. The whispering returned, a low, buzzing roar that made the lanterns flicker. They reached a massive iron door, identical to the one in the north, but this one was already open. Beyond it lay a chamber that dwarfed the temple in the mountain. In the center, suspended by massive chains of blue metal, was a jagged shard of stone the size of a carriage. It glowed with a terrifying, pulsing intensity. Lord Vane was there, standing on a raised platform, his arms outstretched. He was surrounded by a dozen society members, all wearing the silver masks of the broken sun. The clerk returns to finish the ledger. Vane's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the vault. "The watch. Miller. The watch is the final variable. Bring it to the stone, and we shall see the dawn of a new age." Thomas stepped forward, his cane level. "The only age you're bringing, Vane, is one of silence. Arthur, don't let him have it." But Arthur looked at the watch, then at the massive, pulsing stone. He realized something the chronicler and Vane had both missed. The watch wasn't a key to open the light. It was a seal to contain it. The vault was a whirlpool of blue energy. The foundation stone groaned against its chains, the sound like grinding mountains. Lord Vane's eyes were white, his body shimmering as if he were turning into glass. The society members began to hum, a sound that resonated in Arthur's very bones. "Give it to me, Arthur!" Vane screamed, his voice a chorus of 1,000 echoes. "The light must be free." Arthur looked at Thomas, who was fighting his way toward the platform, his cane a blur of motion against the masked men. Then, Arthur looked at the silver watch. The unbroken sun on the glass was now spinning, the golden light within it swirling into a vortex. "It's not a key, Vane," Arthur shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the stone. "It's a drain." Arthur didn't hand the watch to Vane. Instead, he lunged forward and pressed the face of the watch directly against the pulsing foundation stone. The reaction was cataclysmic. The golden light of the watch met the blue fire of the stone. For a heartbeat, there was a sound of absolute, perfect silence. Then, the watch began to pull. The blue energy, instead of expanding outward to consume the city, was sucked into the silver casing. The massive stone began to dim, its vibrations smoothing into a low, steady hum. Vane let out a horrific, metallic shriek. As the energy was drained from the room, the artificial life that had sustained him vanished. He reached out one last time, his fingers turning to grey ash before he even touched the stone. He disintegrated into a cloud of dust that was instantly pulled into the watch. The society members fell where they stood, their masks clattering onto the stone floor. The blue metal chain snapped, and the foundation stone settled into its cradle, now just a large, dark, and silent rock. Arthur fell back, his hand scorched by the cold. The silver watch lay on the floor. It was no longer silver. It was a deep, midnight black. The symbol of the sun was gone, replaced by a smooth, unblemished surface that looked like a piece of the night sky. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing Arthur had ever heard. Epilogue. A month later, London was as it had always been, noisy, dirty, and wonderfully alive. The Society of Ancient Light had vanished into the footnotes of history. Their grand house in Mayfair sold to a merchant who knew nothing of stars. Arthur Miller sat in his office at the Blackwood estate. Thomas sat across from him, sipping a glass of port. On the desk between them sat the black watch. It no longer ticked, it no longer glowed, and it no longer whispered. It was just a heavy, silent object, a secret buried in plain sight. "What will you do with it, Arthur?" Thomas asked. Arthur looked at the watch, then at the pile of ledgers on his desk. "I think I'll keep it right here, Thomas. As a paperweight. It's important to remember that the most dangerous things in the world are often the ones we try to balance with a pen." Thomas smiled, the scar on his face soft in the candlelight. "To the truth, then." "To the truth." Arthur agreed. He picked up his pen and returned to his work. The numbers were clear, the ledger was balanced, and for the first time in his life, Arthur Miller knew exactly what time it was. It was time to live.